Good evening. This is a meeting of the Greenwich Planning and Zoning Commission. I saw this program. There was one of the judge, and she says your favorite part is saying recess. And I'm like, why do I have to say it and slam the gavel? Our first item is Charles Moore with a preliminary site plan to designate 2 units of the existing 4 as set-aside development under Connecticut's 830G statute at 63 Oak Ridge. Good evening, Mr. Hegney.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. John Hegney for the applicant. We were last before you back in July, at which time we spoke to the building department about what they'd be requiring on these applications going forward. In connection with the way the state statute reads, the building department has seen fit that we bring these unpermitted units up to the current code. Before going forward with a lot of these applications, we've encouraged people to consult with architects, other construction officials to make sure that when they look at the numbers at the end of the day, that this is a project worth pursuing. We've done that homework here, and our client is interested in designating these units. And I will say a great amount of work will go into it, not just to meet the multifamily code for 3 families, but 4 families in this situation, to keep all 4 units that are in the space right now.
Okay. And we've got all the building code issues that are raised in the letter in that regard, and your sense was that they could all be addressed. In addition, you have this question of the change of use on the sewer. Have you resolved that?
We've filed a request with Mr. Feminella to see if he'll waive that requirement on this project. 4 dwelling units have been at the location since 1993. Our Aquarian water data history shows very little change in the use. If he'll allow us to waive it, we will appreciate that. If he requires us to file a change of use application, that's certainly something we can do.
Okay. And then the other item for discussion, commission members' opinions on this and thoughts, is that you currently can accommodate 3 cars single file in the driveway. You propose to lengthen that area so that you could accommodate a 4th car single file again in the driveway. You believe, however, that the residents of these buildings have permits for on-street parking?
That is
resident
correct.
Permits, they all have resident permits for on-street parking?
So we did take a look at what the parking situation on Oak Ridge Street is.
And do you know how many spaces are available at that time of day when people come home from work?
I think it varies day to day.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that parking services, much like some of the other departments in town, most notably the transfer station, do provide permits to anyone who can prove that they're a resident in the area. So there is no issue getting residential parking permits for this neighborhood, and that is how the parking is currently managed.
Okay. And you looked at the availability of parking on the street as well?
We have not had that look. Obviously, as part of bringing this application before you, we did look to improve the parking situation. I think the Commission has been very consistent in looking to make
to
parking
accommodate the parking
as compliant as possible, given the circumstances. What we put together to accommodate the 500 square foot drainage exemption. In speaking with Bob Smarslak over at Soundview Engineers, we are exploring to see if we can improve that. What I would ask is that the Commission consider the fact that we're giving the 2 units designated as affordable units, that we are improving the parking situation by getting more cars off the street by lengthening the driveway. My hope is that if we get a chance to return with a final site plan application, that we can show you something that's even more appealing to what you might be looking for.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions? I guess not. Okay, then we will close this item. And if I could have a motion on moving it to final?
I move.
That was easy.
And would you like to add anything to that, Mr. Hardman?
No, that we move it to final, which is what.
With the conditions, the applicant shall address the building code issues as outlined in their letter to Shoreline Designs, Design Group, dated February 22nd, 2019. The applicant shall also resolve the sewer issues regarding whether or not they will require a change of use permit. Further, the applicant shall survey the available parking in the evening on Oak Ridge and advise as to the spaces available. And finally, the applicant shall resolve any issues that remain outstanding with the affordability plan that has been submitted. This affordability plan is for 40 years for 2 of the units in at this address. Any other comments outstanding on this item? No? Okay.
Second.
Any other staff comments and departmental comments should be addressed. The commission notes that you do have a drainage exemption. The other thing that I'd like to note, the other thing that I would like to find in this is that although you have an insufficient parking situation and we would like to see it improved, we are aware that our need for affordable housing may outweigh these considerations, and therefore we move this to final. Mr. Fox has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Our next
very much.
application Calabrese Property Association and Mariano Lozano at 16 Lakeview and 0 Lakeview Drive. This is for a final subdivision regarding the language in the originally approved declaration of restrictions for the open space. Good evening, Senior.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Tom Hegney on behalf of the applicant. This is one that you have seen previously. It's a application to revise the declaration of restrictions on the open space, which my clients would very much like to be able to use to access the very nice natural Mayanas Pond to the west. I do want to thank the commission members who were able to take the time yesterday to come see the property and walk the property, because I think that does give you a good idea as to what we're dealing with and what my clients are looking to accomplish. The plan that is on the screen here is to utilize stepping stones where there are currently steps that are cut stone and cement. The commission also asked that we provide additional landscaping, particularly where the slope is very steep, so that it can act as a barrier, a protection barrier along the top of that slope there. We're looking at taking out the stone wall with cement that is in the just after you get past on the stepping stones, and replacing that with boulders. We were actually able to walk another neighbor's property, discover that there are actually stones that they've been using just as sort of a border on their patio that are very much appropriate for using both as stepping stones and to create the boulder wall there. And very indigenous and natural stones. And then coming around down to the water itself, being able to mimic that all the way down with not small stepping stones, but much larger stepping stones.
So a couple of comments on this. First of all, on the planting, I believe that since you are, I want to ask you this, we pulled out the original letter from Wetlands
Mhm.
and from 2005, and I'm thinking it would make sense, since we were it talks about the protection of the wetland, that you address this with them or conservation in terms of what would be appropriate restoration-type planting as you remove what has taken place there, that you do some sort of appropriate planting, and that be supported as you go forward and discuss this with wetlands. In addition, I don't remember seeing on the site walk, I don't remember seeing any delineation of the wetlands area. It says in their approval that it should be marked, and I'm not seeing it. I didn't see the demarcation, so I think it would be appropriate when when you're working on because you're gonna go to wetlands for the dock, correct?
Yes, and for the path itself.
And the path.
As
So
well
that
as all of the plantings.
When you work with them, that you bring up this issue of the boulder, of the demarcation, and so that you address these wetlands issues. Because as I read their letter, it seems that everything you have ahead of you right now is more consistent with satisfying what wetlands is looking for. That we would be accepting potentially in your final of you doing these boulders based on you having worked it out with wetlands. Is that all clear? Because you're,
Yes.
okay.
And I think, having gone over this with the wetland staff as well, and looking at the Conservation Commission report that came in yesterday, I think they are very much in sync with what the commission is looking to accomplish. And I think the plan that we are developing and that we will continue to evolve with the wetland agency will be in keeping with what the commission's looking for as
Okay,
well.
now, Mr. McRae and Mr. Fox were also on the sidewalk, so perhaps they'd like to make some comments at this time.
Well, I think clearly that this work is in the wetlands area, and the construction of it needs to meet their requirement in the previous approval. I think what we've been challenged with is allowing the use or the path in the open space declaration. And
Yes.
I think I don't want to overstep our authority when it comes to the path and the plantings over the Wetlands Commission. So I think yesterday was a helpful walk. I think that open space needs to look natural,
Mhm.
and I will leave it at that.
Okay. Did you have any concerns as you were walking the property about erosion control and scouring?
Well, I think that's going to be brought up when they do the application and the wetland staff walks the site.
And the revised plan that Mr. Liebman is bringing on the board and that's on the screen shows these check dams to control both the swale on the north side of the
Right.
open space and on the south side,
Yeah,
which
this-
is a concern that the neighbors have had too, that there's been
Yeah.
a great deal of
This
water
might
coming
end
down
up
through
being
there.
a great opportunity, because a lot of times open space gets forgotten about 15 years later, and this will be an opportunity to get it to work actually better it could be, because, for example, the scouring from the rainfall. This is what you're proposing.
This is what we're looking to mimic in terms of
Yep.
it looking natural,
Mhm.
including plantings. And these are some of the the native species
Mhm.
that Mr. Liebman has identified to use
Mhm.
in the plantings. You saw that one
That's a
already.
native species as well. It's local to
That-
Connecticut.
That's one of the natives in the neighborhood. And to allow for more foliage and
Mhm.
and native species to be planted in the area.
Mr. McRae, did you have any comments?
I think Wetlands is waiting on us.
They want to, it's sort of a catch-22. You can't approve what we've asked for until Wetlands approves it, and Wetlands didn't want to do anything until they had heard from you that amending the language of the declaration was in fact acceptable
Right.
for,
Yes.
as part of subdivision review.
Yeah, as long as it serves the purpose of the open space. And I think we will make some findings on that.
We have some of the natives here now that just came in that would very much like to be able to
Native
use
species.
the walkway to get down and enjoy the pond. It is such a resource for our community, and
Oh, if you
they want to
move-
be able to access it safely.
You've moved there. Your community?
I think of the whole town as being part of our
Got it.
community, even if you're from Byram.
But how, it's not preliminary.
Yes.
What I would like to do, I did not file as preliminary. What
I
I'd like
thought
to
you
do.
were converting today. That was my understanding that you were to.
That's the next one.
I asked Mr. LaRoe, and my understanding was you were converting today, no?
I don't believe I
Okay.
gave you that indication.
We would like you to convert to preliminary on the basis that then we can send you a letter.
Well, I was hoping that you could direct the staff to send a letter to the wetland agency.
Okay.
I have until later in December
Yes,
to push
yeah.
this application out. And
Okay, so you'll give us an extension until December
yes,
at this time.
yes.
And then, rather than have us give you a letter on the preliminary basis, you're one, we'll just have staff give the directive to conservation and wetlands.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's what I would prefer.
All right. Okay.
I just wanted to ask a
Yes.
few things, just, Mr. Hagley, just to clarify, I'm looking at page 85, there's some steps. Is this an existing condition, or is this?
Yes.
No, that's
Oh,
the
no.
proposal.
Oh, no, that's what we're proposing.
Oh, that's what you're proposing?
The pro-
But you showed something that actually had some local species in it,
Oh, you.
which is very good.
These are the
Go
native
to the
plants
teps.
that Mr.
Yeah.
Liebman has.
See there, it looks well planted, so it's kind of maybe a better representation of what you're trying to do than.
Do you have a
Yes,
picture
yeah,
of,
that's
Yeah, okay.
what,
perhaps you could show Mr. Levy a picture of your existing conditions?
I have that later on in the slides.
And he'll understand. So, Mr.
So
Levy.
that's part-
what I have.
Those are the steps that
That's
are
83.
closest
Yeah.
to
So-
the pond.
So you're
The-
going to remake those?
The
so-
violation is
And
that.
make them look more like boulders?
Well, the idea is that there isn't supposed to be anything man-made or artificial in the open space, and so they're gonna make it look natural, non-intrusive, and yet that would allow access to recreation, which can be considered one of the purposes of open space.
The treads that you're proposing are monolithic?
They
They're
would,
monolithic, so
Yes.
they'll look
Yes.
like stepping stones.
Mr. Liebman
You know,
is
like-
nodding
okay.
yes.
Okay, so that's the point. And then you're going to try to, I mean, it's all rock, so.
It is all rock. It's going to take some creativity and imagination to make it work and look in a natural way.
Okay. Very good luck.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Could we
just go with a list, a punch list of what we want to refer?
Yes, we're going to, but why don't we do that? Oh, that's right, because we're not going to do it as preliminary.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have comments now, and then we'll do the punch list of everything they have to do?
I have a punch list.
Well, I just
Okay.
wanted to reiterate that I think it's worthwhile to have them continue access to their dock. Right, there's the dock there,
Well, the problem is that the dock has to be approved as well.
but it
and
exists.
It exists, but that doesn't mean that Wetlands is going to let them keep it necessarily,
And they wouldn't let them keep it because what?
because it's on open space, and it doesn't exist legally. It's
But was it-
confusing.
But was it existing prior to it
No,
being
there
done?
No,
was-
no, it was what happened was, it was a subdivision that got created, and wetlands and the open space got designated, and over time, all this was built and added. And there's a quirky thing where the first selectman approved a dock, but after that, there were supposed to be other approvals like wetlands, and they never happened. It never went on down the pike. So the dock is now an illegal use, an illegal structure, if you will. And so they've got to go back to wetlands and get that approved. And at the same time, they had a violation for having made the cement steps in this site.
Good.
And so now they're correcting that to bring it to the natural thing. Mr. Lowe? And then I'll
Thank
let
you.
you go.
In your opening comment, you mentioned that we are, I believe,
So,
looking at removing the stone wall.
I'll send you the article so you can read it.
That-
Is that accurate?
Yes, and that is actually part of our plan.
Okay. So,
This is North Main Street, this is
curious as to
180
what
North Main Street.
Looking at
I'll send you the whole
Yeah.
thing. so you just-
Looking at, maybe I should rephrase that. Our plan is, we have it on, or did have it on the screen, and what Mr. Liebman has on the board includes removing that wall and replacing it with just a series of boulders.
So is it safe
Uh,
to say
that are
you
not-
are going to remove the wall?
I should have worded that better. Yes, we are removing the wall. And the steps that are there as well to make it, as Mr. Levy was saying, monolithic in terms of the natural stone steps.
Okay. Okay.
List.
List.
Okay. To start with, actually, we're going back to wetlands. I think the priority is getting the dock permitted properly. Provide a new plan with the restoration on it.
Could I interrupt you for just a second? The very first priority is that wetlands be satisfied that the proposal meet their goals and intent with, in the buffer area and in terms of wetland protection. That would be the very first thing that the commission requests, that, that's what we defer to them for. This has to be okay
Well,
from their point of
If they're not
view.
satisfied, it's not coming back, so.
Right.
That was
Then
easy.
you go to the restoration planting. Go ahead. Go ahead.
A new plan, provide a new plan with the restoration of the walk areas, showing the walk being removed, the structures that are there being removed and replaced with a more naturalistic layout using larger stones, stepping stones found on the site. The open space declaration is to be revised and submitted for review. The association documents are to be provided for review prior to execution.
Excuse me, are they going to, as it says here in the recommendations, amend the declaration?
Yes.
Yes, that's what I meant. No handrail for the stepping stones. Provide the appropriate site stabilization, ground covers, and landscaping growing around and amongst the new stones. Stones would be taken from the site and from the neighbor's property as well. Any planting or landscaping that's being proposed should be verified with conservation as appropriate for the types and locations. I think that's actually what we have for the list to get you back where you're going.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
No, we don't vote on that, right?
No, we're not going to vote on it. We're just giving, I wanted to.
Give your direction.
Okay, so you have your direction. And with that, we go to our, thank you, Mr. Hegney. We go to our next application, which is Timothy K. Saunders for a preliminary subdivision at 249 Valley Road. This aha.
Good evening, Madam Chair.
Good evening, Senior.
Now, this is actually one where we are converting to a preliminary, so I didn't want you to,
Well, this
Missed
one
that.
is listed on our agenda as being preliminary.
and that's because I did send it to
In time.
staff at the end of last week, indicating that we would convert it to a preliminary. We are now on the opposite side of the Mianus Pond, a little farther north. This is a property that we're proposing to create a two-lot subdivision. It has sufficient area to satisfy lot size, lot shape, and there's adequate frontage for this. We came before you in July, and since then, we have had a number of meetings with the wetland staff and have had significant revisions to the plan. This is the subdivision plan itself. We've added an open space parcel here, and then a conservation easement area here that adds up to 15% of the total site, where the open space parcel is what is in addition to the minimum lot size of 12,000 square feet in the R12 zone. We have submitted to FEMA a map revision. And, a lot of lines on this map, but it had been up here that was the flood zone line. That would have required the water at the Mianus Dam at Route 1 to be about 20 feet over the dam itself. And FEMA reviewed revised plans that Mr. DeAndrea's office provided, and the flood zone line is now down here, which is the floodway line, which is more appropriate since you're not going to have 20 feet of water over the top of the dam. That was granted by FEMA earlier last month, and we've provided a copy of that map revision approval to staff. Might be easier for me to just show you on Mr. DeAndrea's highlighted map, since there is so much in the way of lines on what's on the screen. The next change we made was we had level spreaders here between the building and the shoreline. And as we've been working with the wetland staff, they've asked us to take steps that would reduce any impact or eliminate any impact that would occur to the shore. Here we do show where the wetland boundary is, and you can see the wetland flags. For the most part, it runs pretty much along the shore. As with all the properties on the Mianus Pond, my client doesn't own to the shoreline. That was owned by Metro North and then by the state of Connecticut, hence the reason that you have to go get the approval from the first selectman to be able to put a dock in, because
I never knew why.
it attaches to land that's actually owned by the town, as is the rest of the pond. So that's why the wetlands, a number
I
of years
didn't know
ago,
why.
set up this procedure,
Got it.
which probably needs to be tweaked a bit so that it's done in proper sequence.
I think we could probably take the first selectman out of it. if they agree?
No, the
to
first
that?
selectman is a necessary party.
They
but-
can
but-
they can they
But
can delegate.
probably last in line rather than first in line.
Or they could delegate their authority
Um,
to
The-
wetlands.
The next part of the revision, we were showing detention here and then having the level spreaders down below. What we realized was that the basement level of the building is at elevation 37.6, and there was a fair amount of space between that basement elevation and the actual ground. And what Mr. DeAndrea has done is created a detention basin below that basement that will actually detain a 50-year storm rather than the town standard of a 25-year storm, so that all of this either drains through the pervious pavement here or goes into the detention and then comes out through weep holes in the foundation itself. We also developed a site section that shows how the foundation relates to the existing grade, which is here, and where our basement level is, and you can see there's space between there, and Mr. DeAndrea is showing the type of soils that would be in the detention basin to be able to provide for water quality, not just water quantity. And then our first floor is here at the same level as Valley Road. And the other detention basin in the driveway is right here. What we're looking to accomplish with this is that we don't have any disturbance in the area below the foundation toward the pond itself. We also retained a contractor who has had experience in building on these slopes. In fact, along Valley Road, we found over the last 12 years, there have been 4 structures that have been built, and a couple just within the last few years, just to the north and south of here, that are constructed on basically the same type of terrain that we have here. And we wanted to particularly show the wetland agency that this can be done without any detriment to the pond itself. We conducted a deep test hole here. There was a very big concern that this is a 8-foot-high existing wall that was built many years ago as to whether it provided proper stability. Mr. DeAndrea had a crew out there and observed the deep test hole here down to the footing of that wall, and also brought in a structural engineer to review it to determine its structural integrity. And we have a letter from that structural engineer indicating that the wall is sound.
The conservation comments aren't very enthusiastic about your soil testing and the additional test holes. So just, I mean, this is preliminary, so you're going to have to address that.
And I think
But you
we
have other
can.
issues to address from conservation in any event.
Yeah, the conservation comments were very much in sync with the wetland comments. And as we work through the issues that the wetland agency has, I think that will lead to a resolution with the conservation comments as well. We also, based on a recommendation from Scott Marucci, our town engineer, did a stopping site distance analysis. Last time I did that, it was same traffic engineer, Michael Galante, was over on Old Field Point Road. And there was a question as to if we put the driveway on Old Field Point Road, whether there would be adequate stopping distance for people coming down Hamilton Avenue at that sharp turn where Edgewood Avenue is. And Mr. Galante has been out there, and we're expecting a report from him that indicates whether the 2 driveways actually do have adequate site distance to access the site and exit the site safely. We have applied for front and rear yard variances We're on the agenda for the Board of Appeals for the 16th. And we are also on the wetland agenda for their October 28th meeting. This may take us some more time to work out all of the issues with wetlands and with the town engineer. So that's why we thought that this would be better to address with a preliminary plan rather than a final plan, so that we can get that done and then return to you with a final subdivision plan.
Commissioners, any comments?
Mr. Danger, do you have a moment? Good evening. Quite a novel approach. The drainage is actually in the house. Are there any concerns with, say, in a 100-year storm or something, where the drainage it's in the house is going to compromise the foundation or the bearing of the foundation on the site?
We've designed, for the record, Tony DeAndrew, we designed the foundation of the house in conjunction with the architect, Bill Kleinman, to have a series of weeps across the front wall on the west side of the main foundation wall toward the street. And then similar situation on the lower level, on the lower wall, on the east side of the house, so that we're creating purposeful flow through. It was suggested that by the Wetlands Agency, they'd prefer that we didn't do anything on the east side of the house to limit the amount of disruption or encroachment toward the river. So we brought it all inside. We have
Inside
a
the
wonderful opportunity to have filtration type soil, and we also have developed the detention required up on the top. So we've met all the requirements of the drainage manual, and we've also provided the water quality elements by providing soil under the slab that has those renovative characteristics.
But a little bit, I just want to ask.
Mr. Hegney actually indicated that there'd be variances required for what's being proposed. If for some reason the house needs to be smaller, would the system still work?
The concept?
Well, the system
The
as
drainage
is with your,
concept.
yeah.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
The driveway would be the same. It could be shorter, it could be longer, but the volume that we've provided in the front can be accommodated. What we've done is proposed to fill up basically to the street level, so that the first floor is at street level. Then that prism of earth on the west side of the foundation wall will always be there.
Right, so if the building is smaller, excuse me, if the
Shorter,
foundation is
smaller,
smaller, you'll left, the
We have plenty
leftover
of
goes
volume.
into the driveway?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Who was your structural engineer?
The structural engineer for the house is Carl Raspini was the consultant for the wall outside through
who
me.
was your
And Carl
soil-
Raspini is also,
Who was the soil engineer?
we haven't had the soil engineer that I'm aware of. Borings have not been done for the foundation design yet.
So FYI, you have a lot of experience building big walls lately in town. The soil analysis is critical to the structural engineer.
Correct.
And I would recommend that your structural engineer have done steep slope foundations.
The unique aspect of this design also, Mr. Fox, is that the front wall is going to be the anchor. And that's the concept of the design we've discussed with the structural engineer. In the right appropriate time, there will be more excavation for the foundation done. But yes, sir, understood, fully understood.
Mr. DeAndre, I just want to make sure I understand how the system works. Is there any difference between a filtration system that is open to the elements and then, or one that would be, in this case, under the foundation of a house?
Truthfully not. What the plan of the driveway design is to have that permeable pavement absorb the majority of the runoff from that impervious area. And that satisfies our drainage manual for filtration and treatment, pre-treatment, if you will, of the runoff. Then what we've done is taken the roof drains from the lower portions of the property, then run them through the soil. It's no different than the distribution that's being proposed for the driveway in the front. There's no,
Would you say that this is I don't know if it's more expensive to do it this way or not, but is this an alternative for other house construction to do something like this as opposed to
the difference in,
disrupting?
yeah. I understand where you're going, but the
landscape?
difference in this particular plan is that we have a significant gradient, and one of the objectives of the design is to reduce the velocity and velocity primarily of the outflow. So the Wetlands Agency asked us to eliminate the level spreader, which is designed to spread the water out over a large area. What we've done is take that function and put it inside. What Mr. Hegney pointed out was that there's a significant difference in elevation between the slab of the lower level down to the natural ground. So we have a lot of room to percolate downward and then in this case, easterly toward the river to ultimately discharge. There won't be enough water to fill up that cavity that we've created under the basement. And as Mr. Hegney pointed out, we took the initiative to provide more volume to accommodate a 50-year storm. Volume in the river is not an issue. Water quality is the most important thing on this design, because the Byannis River is not, the volume is not the concern over there. We have nobody downstream.
But you said that there's the water, this system will percolate through weep holes in the foundation?
Yes, sir. We have along the two long walls, the westerly side and the easterly side, we've created perforations, if you will, through the weep holes. So as the water filters down, there was a challenge as to whether or not there was going to be a hydrostatic pressure buildup against the western wall. When you look at the elevations, we're well above the natural gradient. So we can allow the water to go down and actually flow through the natural soil, which is actually going to be buried to a certain extent by permeable material that will allow the water to go downward and then move eastward, similar to what we do with the septic system.
So when you come back from final, construction logistics is a nightmare. I have no idea on this street where you're gonna park people.
And in fact,
There is no space on the road to have any kind of equipment. And there's no space on the site.
conservation actually makes that comment.
And so you need to have something, because we dealt with this at a steep site up before with you,
Was-
Mr. DeAndrea. and
What's
I
the
don't
name of
know,
that street?
It was behind.
Behind, on the other
Belgian
side,
Cheese.
up the
It's
hill.
one west of Cary.
Oh, west, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Westview
Westview.
Place.
That's it.
It's actually a,
That had more space than this.
no, I disagree, but we can address
Well-
that. But the logistics of that is, we're going to build this from the bottom up. So you're creating platforms to work with.
Right, but where are you gonna park your workers to build the foundation?
Okay.
You know, you won't, grading out to build a foundation, there will be zero space on site to park cars.
Temporarily, yes, sir.
No, for the first 4 months till you have a foundation built and backfilled and leveled out, there's zero parking on site. So it's
yeah.
not my first project.
We understand. So that's why, yeah.
You need to be
Cognizant.
crystal clear because of the impact to the neighbors. There's no place to put cars.
I fully agree. That's another reason why we consulted with Tim Muldoon, who had experience and some lessons learned on the construction process that he employed on his other structure just a little ways down the road. And as Tom said, on a very similar topography. But we are fully aware and cognizant of the concern there.
Any other comments from the commission?
Yeah, Mr. DeAndrea, just one quick question. Actually, it's more of a, something I noticed that maybe you've established how this is gonna work or not. On this section, see the driveway leaches into the ground. We've got the weep holes in the front. The roof leaders go into the basement as well, and then we've got the weep hills at the bottom. Is it the intention is that the floor above this crawl space that's shown in that area, that's gonna be water resistant, waterproof? Because there will be water in there at some time.
Not up to the by the computation, not up to the bottom of the slab, because it's just going to drain down. But the answer is, it's going to have an impermeable sense to it, because it's a concrete slab.
Okay. But I'm just thinking, it's interesting, I can appreciate the design here, actually, it's interesting for a slope site, even if it wasn't even on the water or something, if this is something that could be possibly done in other places.
Right. We agree.
Working out a detail to make sure that actually, that first floor isn't gonna fall through in a couple of years because it's all rotting out. That's the one thing I would be
There
concerned
was a
about.
couple of things that we were aware of on this construction. We didn't want to have any voids, where the slab is level and the ground is sloping. So this worked out to be a good solution. We can fill the underneath slab, make use of that volume of soil for treatment and storage.
Right,
And we eliminate the chance that we have these voids that would invite, vermin or mold or whatever. So we
Right.
want to get rid of all that.
okay.
Mr. Lowe, Mr. Hardman, any comments?
I just go back to the memo.
Microphone, those little things that actually work now?
Go back to the memo from
Conservation.
environmental analyst, and this notion that proposed development doesn't represent reasonable balance. And I still not satisfied that I can kind of see the amount of disturbance that's going to go on here and how you address Ms. Becker's comments.
That is the ongoing discussion that we have had with the wetland agency. We had one again just a few weeks ago with Director Sesto. It would not be unfair to characterize her comments as very much in line with the sentiments you just expressed.
Yeah.
And so we know that there's additional work we need to do, additional steps we need to take. We thought that the drainage solution which we've come up with was rather innovative and very positive. We're not going to copyright it, so feel free to use it for other projects. But we understand that additional landscaping is an issue. Dealing with invasive species on steep slopes is an issue. There are a number of items that we're continuing to work on as we
There's actually,
address wetlands comments and conservation.
and not just wetlands, there's actually a broader issue, which is not our decision, but that I am dissatisfied with, which is to propose a subdivision that for which your development plan requires variances up front. I have a discomfort with that because that's not the purpose of our regulations. To create something that you are creating it is non-conforming based on your development plan. It is the Zoning Board of Appeals decision. However, based on the fact, on the location of this property, I am not supportive of a subdivision that requires these variances with a development plan that requires these variances. Mr. McRae alluded to your considering a lesser development plan. I would support that as you go forward, that you look at something that does not require a variance from the get-go. There's really no reason to do so. You do have the existing nonconformity on the existing house. I got that. But you don't have to create a second house that also requires variances. It's not necessary. And so just so you know, this is a preliminary, but I would encourage you to think about those issues as you go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. It is their call. If they decide that they're comfortable with that, given the sensitivity of the environmental issues, it's their decision, not ours. But I would express discomfort.
Understood.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just to follow up, and obviously the owner of the combined lot today, wants to enjoy the economic value. Was there any consideration for simply redeveloping the
No.
property that's on the, what I'll call parcel B, larger property, rather than squeezing or trying to squeeze something into the proposed parcel A?
5 pound, what is that,
It's,
5 pounds of potatoes into a 2-pound bag? How does that go?
10 pounds and a 5 pound.
Whatever it is. That's the, Mr. DeAndrea is laughing because he's heard me say it before. I may not have said it to you, but I know I've said it to Mr. DeAndrea when he's done drainage. But that's your point, that, Mr. Hardman, I'm agreeing with you that the development plan may be more than this site tolerates. And for that,
Well, I just,
Well,
I just, my.
If I
that-
could respond.
That's it, but,
to-
but, you know, property owners entitled to the economic value of a lot of
Exactly.
this size. And is there any consideration to simply build a bigger home on what's proposed to be parcel B and capture the economic value of a larger structure there rather than attacking parcel A, which is.
There has been some thought to that, but this is a very long, narrow parcel. It's
Yeah,
been
we
this
got
con-
that.
It's been in this configuration
we understood that,
for 100 years.
but the world has also
And,
changed.
There
There is
we're
climate
looking.
change.
I
The world has changed.
well,
100
it-
years
the-
ago,
the-
these were not the concerns that they are today. It's a different situation.
we didn't have zoning then. Houses were built closer to
And
the
we
street.
didn't have the kind of storms and the sea level rise concerns that we're hearing from the environmental people. This area would be just as affected. To the Conservation Department's point, not every piece of land is developable. We would not, as Mr. Hardman says, we would not support taking away somebody's right to develop their land. However, developing it less aggressively would be supported more. Got that?
I hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments to add?
I would just reiterate, but also, moving forward, I'd like to see the applicant address the specific concerns of the Conservation Commission.
We're actually going to list them. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
If I,
Yeah,
in
but
the,
I was.
when we move it to if we move it to final, we would list them one by one and ask the applicant to address each one. I've got them noted here. Okay.
Okay, and I just, one last thing was
Yes.
that I would comment on number 2 from Alexandra Mock's memorandum from the 25th of September. The proposal ignores the limitations recognized in the Plan of Conservation and Development and deemed inappropriate for development. So I'm just toss that out there. So all of these things need to be addressed, including the conformance with the
And we
PLCD.
and we recognize that we need to deal with these as part of receiving a wetland permit for the subdivision and for the house construction. And the conservation comments are very similar to what our discussions have been with the wetland director. So we will need to resolve both the conservation comments and the wetlands prior to returning to you.
Mr. Hegney, if I could just follow up on Mr. Fox's comment earlier. So the soil testing and the structural engineer, has those investigations started yet? Has your client gone into that detail?
We have done some soil testing, but based on the conservation comments, we will be, as part of addressing wetland and conservation comments, we will be doing more soil testing.
And that'll be done earlier in the process than a normal build?
I think we need to address that sooner rather than later.
Okay.
So either they're very rich soils, as it says in one part of the conservation comments, or they're very shallow soils, where it says in another part of the conservation comments. So we need to know what we're dealing with subsurface, what's the quality of that, what's its perk rate, so that we can respond to those comments, and the quality of the dealing with water quality
Right.
as the water percolates through.
I'm not talking about the drainage characteristics, I'm talking about the structural stability of the soils, which is totally different set of.
I mean, like mudslide kind of things? Okay.
And it's something that Melick and Tully or several others.
Erosion on the 42?
No, no,
No,
no,
no.
no, it's structural stability of the soil and the soil being able to handle steep slope retaining walls. And there's a whole science behind it, and I think that
So your house doesn't end up in the Mayanas Pond?
That would be one way to lose Mr. Hardman's economic value.
it might float because of the basement that you're building on.
All right.
So there's just a
I-
lot of.
We need to have further in-depth analysis of the site, not only before we come back to you, but before we are successful with wetlands.
Okay, we're going to take a motion on this now, so we will close the
Thank you.
preliminary.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, did we address are we going to get the sightline issue addressed? Is that?
We're going to mention that in
Okay.
the, okay. So Mr. McRae has promised to forgive me if I start this motion, and then he's going to add on to it. I hereby move this application to final. However, in so doing, so jump in if anybody disagrees, the commission notes it does not, it has concerns about the proposed development plan for this subdivision, which requires variances from the onset. The commission does not feel that this meets the purposes of the subdivision, its own purposes in the subdivision regulations. The commission also notes that the applicant shall address the Department of Public Works comments in its resubmit, particularly as regards the sightlines. Also notes the comments from the Conservation Department, which are concerns about the following: 90% disturbance of the lot with the proposed development, concern about from the commission as to the structural stability on the 42% slopes, concern about the testing, the soil testing for drainage being sufficient, the amount of deep fill that will be used on the site, and the loss of the rich soil that is currently on the surface. That the applicant has not provided for contractor parking during construction, that the planting plan does not incorporate upland native species, that the applicant has not addressed slope stabilization after its invasive plant removal, restoration of the protected areas, preservation of native plants within the protected areas, or the protection of existing trees. The applicant does not seem to have considered in its development plan the protection of trees that are on the site. Conservation also notes a deteriorating yard created by the existing retaining wall behind the residence, which may be is resulting in wash into the Mayanas Pond. The Conservation Department has also made a comment about the retaining walls in the floodplain. And the Conservation Department fails to see sufficient addressing of stormwater quality. The last one has been addressed. Okay, so those are the ones that I pulled out of that.
And
Um,
what about the open space?
The open space delineation as well, because one of the plans she had did not delineate it. We recognize that it's a long, narrow lot. We would have liked to have seen additional open space, but we recognize that the lot has some limitation. Okay, Mr. McRae.
Okay, so,
Mr. McRae, can I just ask one question? The delineation of the open space, could we elaborate, just expand on that? I'm not sure I understand what the
She
comment.
got a plan where there's a
Oh,
planting.
this is the comment from Conservation.
Yeah.
Understood. Thank you.
There is open space, but it's not shown on the plans she has.
Understood. Thank you.
okay, just to be clear, applicant is addressing the engineering comments from 9/16/19. There were 8 issues there. Address the Conservation Commission comments, conservation comments, which you just read from the September 25th letter. There were comments from the zoning enforcement officer concerning retaining walls that stated 9/23.
And the variances that were
Okay.
needed,
Now, the variances,
front and side.
we were actually looking at a subdivision here. I think the issue, something, just to be clear about this, is that
The proposed-
technically, the house is fictitious, and although it's our understanding this house actually is what is going to be built, they
Yeah.
need to go and get that resolved.
I would just talk about that in terms of the proposed development plan requires variances that would need to be
Mhm.
addressed before, and just say that that's the proposed development plan.
Okay.
Not that it's fictitious. I mean, could be, but,
Well, that was the whole thing, is that it's.
yeah, proposed
it's
development.
proposed development that proves to us that it could be done.
Right. Okay.
I think that covers everything from our point of view.
Anybody else? Jarvis?
Just, I didn't, as we learned in our previous application, going through any dock requests or any access to the water, I don't see it as part of this application.
So it would be addressed at the time that they
Address-
go before wetlands,
Yeah.
and then they can wait to see who's first selectman
So there, just to mention that there is no dock proposal
at
as
this
part
time.
of this subdivision application.
Nor would there be, because again,
Well, it
Okay.
should be shown on the
do I have a second?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So, for our next application, this is the Battle Hill Corporation for a final site plan and special permit at 62 Mason Street. Ms. Goss, who was seated for Mr. Fox, is absent this evening. Oh, sorry, this is the beginning of the public hearing. Okay, and the mic's been on all night. Okay. So public hearing, and Ms. Goss, who is absent tonight, was seated for Mr. Fox. Mr. Fox will be seated on this item again this evening. And with that, Mr. Tessie.
Correct. Having my assistants, or colleagues, bring up a site plan. But for the record, John Tessie, as you stated, here this evening representing the owner applicant. And with me are our project architect, Steve Muller, Tony DeAndrea, engineer, and Wesley Stout, the project's landscape architect, all here to say a few words, because we've been meeting a few times on this application. Is this the current? This is the parking plan with the driveway? Right. Where's the plan on the change in the, that you did? Where's your plan regarding the sketch of the new, of the driveway in the back, coming out the back?
We'll do that right now.
This one's yours, you guys. I took over on Valley.
Okay.
I'm relinquishing the reins back to you.
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Tessie, I think we'll just pick up where we left off last time. We were talking about the building facades. We can get into the site in 1 second, just,
Okay, that's fine. I was
Yep.
just going to ask, I'd like to proceed. So we're working on getting site information up and analysis. One of the comments that just came back to me was that essentially that we didn't do anything in terms of an analysis of the possibility of providing a driveway through the town parking lot, and we want to assure you we spent a lot of time on that. But we will first, per the request of Mr., if not the directive of Mr. Macri, first deal with the architecture. So Steve, why don't you put up your rendering? Mr. Macri is asking that we deal with the architecture first. And I know you and he had a vibrant conversation on the subject. So if you can take him through the changes and listen to the commentary. Introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening, Stephen Mueller Architects. Last time we were here,
If I could just ask everybody, including the commission, to
Hello?
just use the microphones. I'm getting complaints that no one can hear anything.
this is,
Yeah, that's much better.
okay, perfect, thank you. Last time, this is what we presented, and we took to account all of the comments and studied this a little further, and I think that, in all honesty, the evolution of this has produced a better product, and we've done a rendering. I just wanted to, there were a couple of comments. When I present the next rendering, we haven't changed the drive at all. We've left it as it is because there's been no real decision at this point as to where that's going, so we've left that. And the other comment was, does this represent the elevations and contours that are on the site plan from DeAndrea's office and the landscape architects? And basically they do, they're pretty correct. So anyway, what we ended up doing was, and you guys all had the elevations, we went around the building and made the appropriate changes, but we've ended up doing a little bit more of the verticalness to this. We could not get single windows going across here, so I think the last comment you made, Nick, was that we could start to figure out how to combine these and get some kind of vertical element to it. So we've done that. We've sort of represented this vertical piece of brick going through in these three locations with the coins on the outside, trying to get the verticalness that I think in this one was creating a little bit more horizontality to it, a little bit, you know, not as good proportions as this, certainly. So.
As I was looking at the plans, it seems that each one of the elevations represents this change.
Yes.
Which I appreciate greatly. There were two just issues, it's probably something that you can answer pretty quickly. On the plan, it seemed that the stonework around the front door was undetailed.
Yes, and I have that
Okay.
on a separate drawing, yes.
And what I was trying to get a sense of was how now the building relates to the changes in the driveway, because it seemed that on the drawings I had a lot more wall that went north and south on the property, but it seemed that actually kind of just, it didn't go, on the drawing, it seemed like it went off the property. In reality, it's actually really contained right there. And it was a little confusing on those elevations, so. But if we can start with the front door, that'd be great.
Yeah, so anyway, in the rendering, this was not really addressed here, so we just took a moment to do that. One of the things that I think was, it's very light in our printer. I'm really sorry about if.
Do you
Hello?
have any of these to hand out?
I don't. We just really picked this up just recently. What we found was that it was suggested that, or the thought was that a front portico of some sort was suggested. But we keep on studying this, and this is a void that goes back about 7 or 8 feet, so it's an alcove, it's an entry. Trying to put a canopy, whether it's flat, whether with some columns in front of that, just started to destroy the whole imagery of that and was somewhat redundant. So we were limited, I think, in how to respond to this. But I think that what we did was, by squaring this off and doing a little bit more detail across the head of this door opening or opening to represent some of the modifications that we've made throughout the facades, started to open it up, make it feel a little taller. I think originally we felt that the arch had some relevance, but as we study this, it actually feels better not having the arch. A little bit of further study, I think that, you know, we could set those precast elements out a little bit, you know, sort of stagger them, cantilever them out a little bit if there was a need, not as in a canopy, but just giving it a little bit more relief, although you know that these are stepping out. But
What's the depth from the face of that precast to the door itself behind it?
I think it's approximately 7 feet.
7 feet,
Yeah.
okay. I think actually what I'm seeing here is actually better. It's almost like you want to create its own study there of the precast element, give it detail. Maybe it actually, instead of actually ending on the water table, it goes right down to the porch deck.
Yes.
It's got maybe some more trim to it, you know, maybe it's got some beading on it or something.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely,
yeah.
and I think, you know, we haven't gotten really to the working drawings where we're going to look at profiles and sort of study what the precast can do. And all of these may or may not be flat. In theory, they
Right.
could have some profile to it.
Okay.
So yes, but we're sort of looking for a blessing in the general direction.
Okay. I think I agree with you about about, you know, squaring it off. I would think actually, use that term from schools, you know, celebrate the entrance, you know, make it a real architectural piece
Correct.
that says, here's the front door.
Yes.
I think one thing I would say, really look at is actually trying to bringing it down past the water table to the ground. And, you know, just thicken up the post, the lintel, that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
it has
I
presence.
have no problem studying a little bit further. I think that the fact that, and again, I apologize for the quality of this print, not printing out dark, but the fact that this all is a precast element sitting within, other than the coins, in brick, it does have some substance to it in itself. But the delineation of this, I agree, and more than happy to study that going down.
Great. Now, there's the revision to the driveway, which now moves it, the entrance of the street down, and it kind of slides in.
Actually, Tony could correct me now, but the opening to the garage has remained in the same location. The
But we
drive.
don't have terraced walls now. There's
No,
room to
I
either
believe
side.
it's still terraced
Okay.
in order to get down to this elevation 106 at the lower level.
Okay. I think that's the one piece that needs to be kind of looked at is now we've got this, and how does it relate to that garage entrance? Does the garage entrance have a door to it or a gate or anything on it, or is it
I think
just
the
open?
spirit of that was to have some kind of, you know, rolling, probably something transparent, but some kind of gate, yes.
Okay. I think thinking about that actually would be a critical thing, just to make sure that you've got.
There
you
will
know,
be
yeah.
some sort of gate.
You've
yes.
done a lot of work on top, a lot of effort's been in, you know, just don't put a garage door on it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
I mean, again, I think the whole idea is that there's an opening, there's transparency to it. It's not a solid element.
right, okay, great. I think I'm pretty good, I'm pretty satisfied with what's going on here now, so.
Yes, well, since you have this drawing up, the entrance, which you say is precast, is proportionally is a little bit thin, and if you put some kind of pilaster, something in front of it, it will bring out the sense of an entrance. So, as you were talking about before, but the proportion of the windows to the wall above, and the fact that this is wider and that the walls themselves are so thin, I think is a very modern idea about design, because it shows conceptually an idea of modern architecture, not traditional architecture. So if there was a little bit more meat to the walls of the entrance, I think that would play better architecturally. And by having something in front of it, such as some kind of tympanum columns, whatever, I think that
I think even just thickening those up actually in relationship to the brick above, that width of brick, thickening up the
I mean, it looks like it should be twice as thick as it is.
I think that's what he's going to go back and do.
Yeah,
is
so-
actually do a good hard study of it.
And to have something that is proud of the face of the exterior wall, I think would go a long way to announce the idea that this is a...
Yeah, I think if I could interpret what you're saying is that I think that no one's suggesting that another element has to go in front of this. I think we're suggesting that if this has this opening, has some kind of depth to it that projects slightly beyond the
Right.
plane of the...
Right, it's giving it a little bit more weight to its
Yeah.
prominence on that
Yeah.
elevation.
Yeah, and I think that if, the only way to really probably accomplish that would be to run it down, because otherwise the coins, I want to be proud of the coins, I think, in this. And I think if there was some substance to the jam of this.
Yes.
With, this thing projecting or cantilevering slightly out from the head, I think it would be
I think you're right.
kind of the direction,
Yeah,
I think, what you guys
exactly.
are
I think
telling
so,
me.
but also, you have a window above this entrance, which is also fairly close to the opening.
Yeah, I mean,
visually.
this was the arch right here. It's hard to see right here, but,
Yeah.
we've got that, this is pretty wide. It's
But if you go back to the other drawing.
Yeah.
You have, that's not a panel, that's just some
Yeah,
kind
this is a precast panel with
with
the
the
brick
precast
in
panel.
there.
That, I think, can be, that can change. I would like to see that entrance somehow a little higher. You put some kind of, classical element above it, whatever. It doesn't have to be so thin. If you could incorporate that into the entrance more so, there's no point in having that panel there and associating it with the window above.
I think it with that panel, actually, it creates a consistency with the rest of the windows on the facade. I
Oh,
think
well,
he has some opportunity to go higher and go lower.
Okay, yes.
And
then I
resolve
think
that.
that can probably, I think you can borrow some of that height there and get a little bit more height for that entrance detailing.
Well, again, Nick had presented something that we worked pretty hard to establish, and that was, this consistency going across. But I don't necessarily disagree with that.
It doesn't have to be much.
Well, let me just show you something.
Yeah.
This is not what I think we would do, but it
Okay.
is something we looked at,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So I understand what you're
Exactly, but
saying.
there's so many ways to do that.
That is the element regardless of whatever's, happening else here, but even if the fact actually it's the thickness
Right,
that's
and it
happening
wouldn't
here.
affect our
Exactly.
window. Yeah.
It can
So
go
you
down, it
understand.
can go up,
Yeah.
you've got some room to play
So,
with.
I'm more than happy to continue to sort
Great.
of develop this, with your blessings.
And,
Yes.
What is on the roof? Is there, there's going to be a bulkhead on the roof somewhere?
Yes, it's actually,
Is it
the stair tower goes up, it's on the north side, correct?
Yes,
on the north side?
Right, it's the stair tower and elevator tower,
that's correct.
and the roof actually has four terraces for the
That's-
4 units.
That's correct, and that was another question, just to
Right.
answer. There's 4, and they were intended for the second and third floor
Second and third floor
usage.
units.
Yes,
We'll have access to those, okay.
correct.
And is there going to be any detailing to those structures, since they're going to be high on the roof? Not, even though you may not really see them necessarily from the road, but maybe from
Well, there's
some other.
over a 3-foot high parapet wall going around that's built into this
Mm-hmm.
mansard roof, so everything is set behind that, so there isn't additional fencing or anything behind that.
But
We won't see the roof, we won't see the amenities behind the roof, behind the parapet. We'll see the stair tower pop up.
Yeah,
but
so
that's
is
actually
there
something that
any
does
way to,
recede.
to detail that so that it kind of blends in, looks more like a part of the roof,
Yeah, do that.
some
Well,
kind of
yeah, well, yes,
chimney, some kind of,
We actually, just preliminarily speaking with our structural engineer, if that was brick, there was a tremendous amount of additional load there, too expensive. So we're not going to do it in brick, and I think we can do it in a much lighter material, something that just can be laid down, if you will. But it doesn't ever touch the roof or the parapet. I have to go back and look at
It's
that.
set back off of the mansard, the top edge of the mansard.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But I think the idea is to have, the most minimal roof there that we can on top, so it's as flat as it can be, just enough to slope, maybe without much study, copper roof, metal seam roof, something like that, that's just played down. And,
That actually might be like a standing seam roof or something on top of it.
Yeah, something to soften it, and it
Absolutely.
shouldn't look like a concrete
Yeah, well,
block.
the whole idea is that is intended to sort of go away, and
Okay,
Good.
great.
Can I address a little bit more of the other, I just have my notes here.
Yes.
That it was requested a little bit more study be done of approaching from the rear?
Yes,
Okay.
very much.
Okay.
And you're not the person to talk to about it, but the other thing is this shell game that's going on with the trees was disturbing. I know Mr. Tessie, I said that to you the last time. That driveway from the front necessitated removing a tree to accommodate the width of the driveway. You were gonna save the magnolia. The magnolia has a split trunk. Tree warden says that it can survive with the split trunk for a very long time. Now you're gonna save the sycamore. Tree warden actually thinks that the maple is more important. And they're very sorry that the magnolia has been deemed not savable. All of this could be addressed if it was possible to enter from the rear and you could save all the trees and preserve the streetscape. So both of those issues, I didn't mean to scare the architect away, but.
Still here.
Okay, but both of those issues could be addressed if it were possible to enter from the rear. I believe the last time you mentioned that there was a grade change issue. And I see you have, I guess, is Mr. DeAndrea your engineer? Is that who addresses that?
Okay, first of all, nobody's playing a shell game. Let's get
Well,
this
it was,
straight.
I was upset the night that I thought the magnolia was being saved and you guys came forward and suddenly what had not been represented to the tree warden, it turned out that you deemed the magnolia unhealthy. So
Look, no one
that was,
deems
it
thing-
felt like it felt odd. how about I withdraw shell game and just say this odd situation with the trees that are being saved?
Mr. Orlando got up and explained to you what happened with the tree warden when the tree
Right.
warden made the recommendation. It was a recommendation that his preference was to save the magnolia. Mr. Orlando, so he's not an expert in the area, and he's of course said he'll do everything he can to save it. He talked to Mr. Stout, who's here today, talked about what it would really take to have this plan and save that magnolia. Mr. Stout studied it. He had, I think, up to two now, but certainly one tree expert look at it. You've got that big crevice in there. I'm not sitting here saying I know a darn thing
Neither am
about
I.
the issue. Okay, but the point of the matter is, we can all see that large crevice in that tree. The point was made by the arborist that the tree was in the condition as was described by Mr. Stout, and he's here this evening with a further update on that point. What we tried to do here, well, first of all, okay, let's get back to this point. Mr. DeAndrea is here. He and Mr. Miller collaborated on what it would take to get a driveway coming from the rear.
Great, because that was
Okay.
the thing we didn't know.
Okay, and as we preliminarily knew, it was problematic. So putting aside the legalities are very real, I want to have them get up and talk about the practicalities and basically, you know, the numbers, if you will, in terms of the grades. We should also just remember, as my final point, there is actually a rear building line for Mason Street that is shown on the survey, which limits how far a tree could, not that you want to push the building up anyway, but there is not that I say a rear, I meant a front building line.
Didn't have a rear building.
No, I made a mistake, Miss Albin. I make
Oh.
mistakes.
Oh, my gosh.
I was correcting myself. A front building line, not a rear building
I
line.
didn't think we had one of those either.
Yes, there is. It's called out on the survey. Mr.
Okay,
DeAndrea
I didn't
can
see it.
further
Okay. All right.
elaborate on it. So I'll let these two gentlemen
Okay.
choose who's going to describe to you the difficulties and the impracticalities.
It's the grade change that was raised as the impracticality the last time. So if you would elaborate on that.
Yes, I appreciate the fact that, you know, there was no graphics to kind of represent what we inherently knew were some of the problems. So we just spent a little time to do that. So there are really two factors that, as the architect, I can discuss, and then I'll let Tony jump in. But in order to even begin to possibly have this work at all, one would have to pull the front of this building up to the 10-foot.
Can you tell me why? Can you walk me through? You have an elevation of 116 at the rear of the building.
Yeah, okay, I can do that.
And your ground floor elevation at the bottom of the garage is
Surveyor,
106.
talk about the,
And you
the
can't
grades.
make that 10-foot change in the length of an access way into the garage, Mr. DeAndrea?
I didn't hear all that question, but
Well, you know what the grade is.
yeah.
You know what the change is.
Let's go back to the site plan for a
Yeah,
minute.
go back to the site plan with the grades on it, yeah.
Tony DeAndrea representing the Battle Hill Corporation. And I don't want it to be an uphill battle, just,
Oh, you've been spending too much time here.
but what we wanted to talk about at the last hearing was taking an average grade between the two sides of the building along the parking lot side. The elevation would be roughly 117. That's just the midpoint. But it drops to 115.7 on the southwest corner and rises to 118. So we have a difficulty just warping that driveway if it were going to be constructed.
Okay.
And then we have the obligation to keep the building behind the building line, but what Steve was trying to say was, if you were trying to get in from the parking lot to the garage, you'd have to push the building all the way up to within 10 feet of the street, and the end result would be a slope of about 33%, because you're trying to get from 18 down to 106, 118 down to 106.
No, it's at your entry point of the driveway, it's 116. Okay, so 116 to 106, 10 feet, and you can't accomplish 10 feet in
No,
a
and what-
driveway ramp.
And what
Why
has to
not?
happen, if you're going to do it, you have to warp it down, and then you have to soften it in to the garage. You can't just go from angle point to angle point. Yes, sir.
A question we discussed briefly yesterday. If the town gave you the 2 parking spaces to create this entrance from the rear, what if you began the descent at the westerly edge of those parking spaces, put retaining walls on either side?
That's
Does that begin to get you there?
not really. I think what you're suggesting, becomes that steep tunnel, and you have to still accommodate the spaces on the other side. That kind of a setup would be difficult to make the turn, because you're coming from an aisle which is only 18 feet away. In comparison, when you're out on Mason Street, you're 7 feet more away from the curb, so you have a larger radius to enter the driveway. And that would not exist in the scenario that you just suggested, because we have a tight parking lot, and the aisle spaces the parking spaces and then the aisle are limited. But I understand what you were suggesting. You would gain some length of run, but you're coming in the back door.
Right, and that's not enough to have a practical
No,
solution.
and then the other thing is, you wouldn't be just accommodating, you wouldn't be requiring just 2 spaces, because you have to have some space on either side for safety and sidewalks and railings and everything else. So we're not just talking about 2 parking spaces.
Yeah, I think that's what I was just asking Mr.
Oh,
Fox, so
and-
if you would tell,
Yeah.
yeah, so it would be a 12% grade. You can't run that ramp all the way down to the end of the garage and have the cars.
Right.
I mean,
You get too far into the garage structure to make that happen. Many times we've had this discussion where we have not preferred, and in some cases not allowed, parking on a 10% slope, which we have tried to do, particularly one time on the Lexus dealership and others. So we're aware of that. If you were going to park, we always try to keep the parking slopes at not more than 5%, so that's 1 foot across a parking space, so we try to keep that limitation in there so the doors don't slam shut on us. The other thing that you want to think about is that the garage elevation right now, based on accommodating the topography of Mason Street, is 106.
Right.
And the elevation of the southeast corner of Mason Street is 106. So if you were to lower the garage, you would make the ramp in from the parking lot steeper. If you were to raise the garage to lessen the slope, your building would be out of the ground in the front.
So let me just ask you the stupid question. Wait, one last stupid question. Your garage sticks out behind the building. Why can't it stick out in front of the building?
Because we're up to the building line.
Okay, got it. Okay, go ahead, Andy.
So that's the key in this particular layout. We
Okay.
can't go past the building line.
if you slope the entire garage, no.
If you slope the entire garage slab and basically made it a parking deck, do you have enough height so you start at the alley side at
117.
117, where's the building above it?
The building above it, right now, the first floor is set at 118.
No, but where's the building line?
Right, the building structure above,
Yeah,
I can
can't-
highlight it here a little bit. It's right
Here, here, here.
That's the building.
Hold on, I'm gonna show him on this. It's right here.
Well, you guys, you could use a little bit more ink for us people that are visually impaired.
Well, I could see it, and you're younger than I am, so.
So the question is, if you slope at 5%, can you get 7.5 feet at the building line and park.
I haven't assessed that profile, but my initial reaction is, if you're lifting the ramp, then you have to
No,
lift
I'm
the
just-
ceiling.
I'm tilting the entire.
No, I know, so, but you're lifting that, so you have to have your headroom, then you gotta have your structure, so you're pushing the,
That's my question.
you're
Can
pushing
you-
the rear end of the building out. That's what I was just saying to Ms. Alban, that if you did that, if you were to lift the building to lessen the slope, either by doing a ramp or just plain lifting it to lessen the slope, you're pushing the building up out of the ground,
No,
Okay.
which
that's-
exacerbates the condition in the front.
Now, I'm going to switch, okay, go ahead. And then I'll
So,
switch.
first floor grade is 118?
Yes, sir.
No, the first floor
Fir-
grade is
first floor
your
grade is-
elevation, you're finished.
Yeah,
It's
118 first floor. The garage is
finished, right?
106
And it's roughly set back 30 feet?
from the street, yes.
And you
No,
need,
Little
from
more.
the rear.
and you need 12
Oh,
feet floor to
from
ceiling.
here, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
the back, you're talking about the back, yes.
And you need 12 feet floor to ceiling in a garage?
No, you need the entrance in a structure, you probably need 8.6.
So why do we have 12 feet?
Well,
So why do we have 12 feet floor to ceiling in the garage?
Because
mechanical and
there-
stuff.
There's first you have the headroom, then you have the structure, then you have your 3 feet of material above the garage to make your floor, your garage underground.
Okay. What, any thoughts? Okay, so, Mr. Tessie, I want to ask you the heretical question here. No shell game, heretical question.
I don't even know what heretical means.
Heresy is going against the religion.
Oh, heretical.
How?
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
Would your client be adversely affected or opposed to not having the moderate income and reducing this to 5 units? I'm just asking because you've heard us. We keep struggling with this building.
No, I hear you.
Everybody
we're-
struggles.
We're all struggling with this, and I
So-
think in good faith in all regards.
Yeah.
The answer is,
So how would your client feel about not even doing the moderate, just doing 5 units and calling it a day? Just a question, because, I mean, we are just, it's been a very painful discussion. You've been to ARC 3 times, and everybody struggles with the impact of this building. Maybe we just make it easier for everybody.
5 units or 4?
Well, 5, because it's 7 and only 2 are
well, you're
moderate.
going to lose the 2 units.
And then what happens to your FAR? Do they go to FAR? What is it?
How would we accomplish that in the zone?
We go, no, I mean, to go to within the zone's FAR.
It's 0.3.
And what's the existing building?
The existing building is under 0.3, then I think if you took the
Blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah, existing is 0.3, okay. No, you can't build anything at 0.3.
The lot is just narrow and
So, okay, so the problem is what Mr. LaRoe just said to me, and I'm sorry, I just didn't think it through. I was trying to come up with something that solved this, but your FAR on the existing is 0.3. So then you're
Yeah,
stuck.
the FAR.
You're going for the
Yeah.
0.9, and the only way you can go do the 0.9 is if you do the moderate. But that's why the building is also, but we're struggling with just what happens, the impact of this building on the streetscape.
Well,
How about instead of 7, 6? We'll lose 1 unit out of it.
But then you wouldn't be able to let them go to 0.9, or would you reduce the FAR then? That could be a way of doing it.
But if you reduce a unit, where does that come at? If you reduce a unit, how does that doesn't make sense in the whole jigsaw puzzle, you know what I mean?
Oh, because there's 3 on the first floor.
Well, you're reducing the parking as well. You could then maybe, I'm just trying to figure out a way to have this save the trees, not have it be as,
how does that say, for me, just ask? how
that's
does-
what I'm
how does-
asking.
That doesn't
is
save the tree.
If the
well,
building didn't require as
well,
much parking as it does, would you be able to do something different? Would, if the building wasn't as big as this, if you did, I don't know, I'm just trying to solve it, because we're really we keep sticking on this, that it's the loss of the trees and the change in the streetscape. I think the 2 architects are satisfied with the design, and I really applaud you guys for working this over and over again. because I know you were at ARC 3 times. But I'm still struggling with the impact of this
I think it's-
structure.
Excuse me.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Mr. Lowe.
Are there any circumstances
That would work.
in which your client would agree to have the entrance to the parking from the rear?
Well, the,
You don't think, see, Andy doesn't think it works
I don't
structurally.
think it physically works.
And neither does Nick, actually. Nick's been saying that all along,
It-
that
it
he
just-
doesn't think it works
yeah.
structurally.
And then
Well, no,
we
I
don't
mean
even
with
have
a
the-
reduced size of the building, et cetera.
But the reduced size of the building could also mean less parking requirement, not as big a driveway maybe, save, I don't know.
well.
I don't
look,
know. I was
we
just
can
trying to
put in.
think.
We look.
I'm trying to think out of the box because I feel
No,
very
I-
stuck. I
I-
know we keep going around this merry-go-round and, you know, there's this internal resistance to the streetscape impact of this building.
I think the question comes down to, can we save the sycamore and the
Or the maple
and
and-
the two maples by shifting the driveway
Magnolia.
and making it a 20-foot driveway?
Would DPW be amenable to going 20 feet on the drive? I don't know. From what tree warden told staff last week it was that you met with the tree warden, they value the magnolia and the maple. They actually would have preferred, in
Wish we knew
retrospect,
all of
they
that
were.
before my client spent all the time and money. to
I know, I
work
get
on
it.
shifting.
I
I'm
get
not
it.
blaming-
I
I'm
get
not-
it. I get it.
I mean,
It's been a circle here, and I get the fact that, but I think it's because everybody's just kind of stuck on the impact. On how it looks.
you know,
Okay.
So it's inherent in the regulation change itself, that in every project that comes up, and actually pretty much every project that has come up to you under this regulation, has
Has struggled.
caused some consternation.
I mean, and you've
Struggling.
lived through a couple of them.
And yes, I have, and, you know, it gets back to the point about the noble intent of the regulation versus other factors that commission members are
Focused
dutifully,
on.
if you will, concerned about. That's, you know, that's not gonna change, and, you know, this particular project on a mathematical basis, because the way the numbers work, is providing 28%, right, of the project. Those are the numbers, rounded down, in fact. But 28,
It's 29.
yeah, I was gonna say, that's rounded down,
Yeah.
right, it's 29%. But, you know, you sit there just as you're doing now, and juggling and balancing priorities. The priority was decided that, rightly or wrongly, as you're looking at it, right, that moderate income housing was worth the struggle that you're going through now, when in terms of other parameters that you're concerned about, one of which being streetscape. We're working very hard to do what we can, but at the end of the day, to basically fulfill that goal of increasing moderate income housing in Greenwich, this is not atypical. This is typical of what it will take. So what's that mean? That means you may want to rethink the regulation itself, which is understandable in a number of regards, including, you know, interestingly, the number of projects you're seeing and what you're struggling with, as we said, may or may not want to reduce the particular zones. The CGB zone was not in the, was not in 6110G. It was added. LBR was added. It was LB, GB, and GBO.
And we did that on
Greenwich
purpose.
Avenue, which is built up, so that's not as problematic. Overall, is this a super dramatic change to a pristine street? Well, the answer, truth of the matter is no. It's a mixed bag on Mason Street from top to bottom. This is a handsome building. Mr. Macary's gonna get a plaque if it gets built, right? Because
share.
everybody worked, I didn't mean to slight you, Mr. Levy, but the truth of the matter is, there was a noble goal to get the building as soft as one could. In fact, that even worked internally. The actual height of the third floor is, under our regulations, 30 feet. I think we've demonstrated how, in terms of the building vis-à-vis the buildings on either side of it, it doesn't protrude up. It blends in at that level. Most of its bulk is, remember, this is a long lot. Most of this building's bulk really is on the east-west, right? It's on the east-west line. It's not north-south. You're
No,
not
I
seeing
understand that.
expansive. Okay, so in actuality, from a streetscape standpoint, with all the landscaping put in, you really, other than the fact you now have a driveway going through to get to the garage, you really haven't intruded substantially on the streetscape, in my very humble opinion. Now, trees can be replaced, trees can go down. We can enhance, as Mr. Stout pointed out, we can enhance the landscape enough where you're going to get that coverage and get that replication in a matter of just a few years, and Wes can speak about that. You know, you're going to get growth from the trees that we're proposing to plant in. That, in a few years, will, basically make this a memory.
Think.
It's just a point.
I can
That's
tell
in
you
fact the
all
reason
the
those are the reasons for a vibrant landscape plan. If we could save the magnolia,
No.
we would.
Just a second, Mr.
Go ahead.
Mr. No, what Patrick heard from the tree warden when he met with them last week was that they would prefer to save the magnolia and the maple and not save the sycamore. That's the last thing. And I agree, I understand that they circled, but that's what they said to him. So that would go back to being straight, as it was in your original plan, which hopefully you kept. Go ahead, Mr. DeAndrea. Mr. DeAndrea is coming to the mic.
I just had a little conversation with my client out in the hallway to kind of correct the record.
Okay.
Albert, correct me if I misspeak again, but the magnolia tree is hollow,
I understand that,
And
but the
that-
tree wardens.
but it should not be saved.
Okay, that's not what staff is saying to me. I understand that. I know that you said that, but that's not what staff has heard from the tree warden. They heard them say that trees can be hollow and live for many, many years, but that often an arborist will not deem them healthy because they are split. That was what the tree warden told Patrick last week.
Okay.
And that they would have liked to have saved the magnolia as they had originally asked.
Okay,
We
so-
understand that. I'm not confused.
Can we
I get
propose
it.
this then for the driveway? If we can find a way to work around the magnolia, if that's actually has merit.
And the maple.
And
the maple on the
It's your
southern
original-
side,
It's your original plan,
then we can go back to removal of the
Sycamore.
sycamore and
London
even
Plain.
push the driveway up instead of
Right.
the suggestion that I've made here, dropping to the south, we could drop to the north.
And then the next, so it's your original
In
plan.
other words, just flip this over, John, and take out the sycamore, save the magnolia by flipping this driveway.
It's their original plan. Mr.
It's just,
Tessie.
the original plan would not fully save the magnolia because of the
Okay.
walls.
Now,
Can you reduce the driveway to 20 feet?
yes.
It's only 16 feet now.
No, I thought you were at 20-something.
No, no, no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
No,
told you
But the
22.
question I have, Tony, I thought there was some issue because we're going to be going higher up.
Why does he even
How,
have
is-
16?
are we going to make the grades?
You're gonna be coming down a little steeper.
Little
It's
steeper.
not two-way. You can't do two cars on 8.2. How wide is the car?
107.7, so it's not too much different.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So, Mr. DeAndrea, the Indian Field Bridge, the bridge over the tracks, how wide is that?
Too narrow.
Right. I think that's about 2 cars exactly.
This is 16 feet from. Right, but this, the issue of that
So my
is
point
that
is, you don't really have two-way driveway anyway. Why don't you just make it one-way?
we do have two-way, and I think it's
But it's
necessary.
not
to
wide
have-
enough for
It
two-way.
is, it is wide enough for two-way from a practical standpoint because you can pass 2 cars with mirrors out and everything on 16 feet. You can. And I know that because we all have some personal experience. My
With
driveway is
having their
14
mirror
feet
go in.
wide, and my neighbors park, and I can still get in every night without hitting them. So 16 feet is wider than 14. I know that 16 feet is sufficient
So
to accommodate two-way.
could you make it less?
I wouldn't want to.
Could you make it only one way and people wait?
That's not a good idea. And the reason is, people don't wait, and you can't get halfway in the driveway and then decide you have to back out onto Mason Street. So I wouldn't suggest that would
That's
be
a good point.
appropriate. I think that 16 feet is good. I think we can warp it a little bit to the north. We can try to save the Magnolia. I'll have to rework our outlet for our drain, coming more down the middle of the driveway and then angle it down to the manhole.
So
Could we, by,
using,
just one, and by doing that also, one of our benefits is it deals with parking and engineering, I think. Or does it not? If we can bring that farther north, can we keep the 2 parking spaces? We're gonna be able to get 2 parking spaces to the south, or you think only 1?
I think I'd have to look at that. Let me see.
so Mr. DeAndrea, using the center line of the garage door,
Yes, sir.
you would just mirror over the serpentine configuration. So it actually now intrudes into where the front walk is, that kind of thing. It's just, that would
Right.
be the reconfiguration. And then everything else to the south of that would have accommodated saving the maple tree, the magnolia tree, and regrading. So the southern part of that driveway could be the retaining wall itself? Or would
We'd
you?
like to have a little bit of a shoulder always for,
Okay,
otherwise people think that they're up against the wall. So we
Right.
don't want to have a complete tunnel.
right, okay.
Can I make
just
one
wanna
more
understand
comment?
Something.
Yes, sir.
If you flipped the entrance, so instead of it being on the north side of the north corner down to the southern corner, just flip the whole scheme.
Flip the whole building.
Then you'd be essentially starting where you could, would you be able to create more of a serpentine going in and out of the,
I don't think we want to go too extreme.
Because
What
it-
I was trying to do with this is show that basically it's a straight driveway.
yeah.
But if you tried to flip the whole building, Mr. Levy, I think what you're doing is then you're killing the magnolia and the maple. But you're definitely killing the magnolia.
No, didn't understand what you said. So, let me just go through this.
Yeah, show me here.
So what you do is, the entrance right now,
The front door.
the front door is on the north side of the
Yes.
property. If you put that on the south side of the property, you'd have a lot more of, more open area of lawn and plantings if you shifted this entrance into the garage more to the north.
So, in a sense, he's coming off Mason Street to the north corner of the garage, eliminating one or two of those, couple of those spaces that are inside.
Plus-
And it comes in along the north wall of the garage itself.
And then your entrance is southerly as opposed to on the north side, so it's a little nicer.
When I reworked this driveway, my intent was to maintain the aisle down the middle, which I
Right.
did. And by flipping the spaces inside, I was able to meet the 10-foot setback, 10-foot dimension on all of them. And I was able to save the front without losing any spaces. If you push the driveway all the way to the north wall,
You
you
have-
lose spaces.
Yeah, we're gonna lose spaces in there.
You
sure.
definitely lose
Already.
spaces.
Wait a second, though. Right now, if you shifted everything over just a little bit to accommodate using the existing entrance to the property, if you had to shift it over 5 feet or something like that, this one space, you have a handicap space there right now. It seems to me that you could shift things around, and because you have storage here, you have storage on the other side, you could flip that and put it seems like it could work somehow.
We'll certainly look at it, but I don't believe that we
You know what I'm
can,
saying?
Yeah,
Because
I
if
think
you,
they'd have
if
to
you,
reconfigure a lot
I
of
don't believe
that
we can put the entrance on the south side.
stuff. Right.
So-
Take a peek at that, I think it'd be good enough.
Can you play with this and come back
Could I-
one?
the entrance to
Can you give us an extension?
the dwelling,
You gotta give us an extension.
Mr. Levy?
yeah, down there. So in other words, the
Just a kid.
storage would be.
Mr. Levy, may I respond to,
So then you can move this over a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'll take a look at it. Okay.
I think it works.
could I just a couple of just broad comments about that? Just one thing, the garage goes up to property line, and where the elevator and stair core sits relative to that basement. There is no room to move it in any direction. If we flip it, one of the things...
Maybe if you could come here, I can show you what I'm talking about, because I don't know if we're talking apples to apples.
Yeah, yes, more than happy. Just
Okay.
one other comment was is that if we put the elevator and stair core element, it's facing south, where now we currently have all of our terrace areas for each floor facing south. They have a south exposure and supposedly a better view as you get higher up. So if we were to just totally mirror that, then we're sort of putting the service and core elements on the south
Understood.
side of the building.
Understood, understood.
All right, so here's the deal. So we have this as a must close tonight. How would you feel about coming back in 2 weeks with these changes, and we'll be done with it? Everything that got talked about tonight.
What Mr. DeAndrea was talking about is that we can't flip the building where we just.
No, but you're gonna modify the driveway. You're gonna make the architectural adjustments that were discussed with Levy and McRae. And we'll put you on the agenda first up.
Mhm.
You can do that, right, Patrick?
14th?
On the
15th? What's there?
no,
15th.
15th. It might not,
15th.
there's a chance it might be the 16th. Not sure, did
The
we
issue is, town hall is
closed on Monday?
the 14th.
Oh, that's the holiday, right?
That's
Yeah,
the holiday, so the
Columbus
problem is
Columbus Day.
you,
Well, we want to make Columbus.
right.
I'm surprised they
So-
haven't gotten rid of him yet, but, so I'm all for that.
Yeah, so if you could modify the driveway, make the changes,
Yes.
and
I
come
think
back
we
in-
have an elegant solution here.
I think
Appreciate your efforts.
we have, DPW has given you an okay to permit. I don't think you have any other outstanding significant issues.
So I
Um,
think now with this change, it works at a number of levels here. And that was an excellent idea. Well, I just thank the tree warden for
Yeah, well,
choosing the southern tree.
the other thing we asked, just so you know, we did, when we talked to staff,
Mhm.
we suggested a better process for the future, because this turned into a circle with the tree warden that was unproductive for everybody involved, you guys and us, both the
Yeah.
applicant and us. It got too circular. It would have been better if we had had a clear communication up front, so we are gonna fix that for the future, so.
I think we should have a discussion I think that about this whole process, about
Yes.
this early meeting, getting a sense from the staff, but really no commission input.
Well,
and-
actually, you know, Mr. Tessie, what we really want to do
Yeah,
is be able to sit with the applicant at a pre-application hearing with the commission where we can summarize our take on your proposal.
yeah. What,
And write it to you so that you're not only hearing it from staff, you've talked to the commission
We're-
and you don't get
we're,
caught in a
we're
loop.
we're on the same page. I think because it was, the whole point of doing it that way was actually done total good faith, because your idea, which we appreciated, was that have the applicant come in early and not, if he's going down the wrong road, we can stop you early so you're not spending a lot of money.
Right,
And of course, we see that's kind of backfired in
Right.
a number of instances. And the preliminary, I was thinking about this actually, and Tom may have some input. I think there's some, because the preliminary doesn't count, if you will, right? And I think it's just a question of degree. Like, we go into these staff meetings on these applications, staff, all department head meetings, which I think is good, and it serves a good purpose. But the truth of the matter is, everything goes through you. We know when we have wetlands, we get a separate sense. And I think it's just a question of figuring out, Pat, to what degree on these preliminaries do we go? Probably something less than we require now.
wanna
but
try-
m-
there's
but
a
more,
communica-
but more than, but more
There's a-
than is
so-
required for those staff departments.
So,
That's it, I'll be quiet.
we're gonna have staff send you there's a Connecticut state statute that we've been looking at that enables a pre-application hearing by the commission. And that's what we'd like to do, so that you don't even have to do, you give us a sketch, you tell us what it's gonna look like, and we give you our input in writing. Not a binding,
No, I
yes, we
understand.
love it.
Other
But at
municipalities
least,
do that.
because what we see over and over again is that we get something that everybody has told you is okay, and we don't like it. And now you're stuck and we're stuck. And that's what we
All right,
want to
we're on the
fix.
same page, well.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
Absolutely.
So we've got a
You
deal.
get this point through experience, right?
Yeah.
So now you
Okay,
know.
so does anybody from the public want to speak on this item? No. Okay, any other commissioners want to weigh in? Otherwise, I did it again. Mr. Tessie is going to give us an extension until, play it safe. You don't think we're going to have the meeting on the 16th?
Doesn't matter.
There's
I mean, it's just-
logistic issues with that, so
Okay.
we'll talk about it at the end of the meeting, but
Okay.
We'll give you an extension to the 20th. It doesn't really matter, is it?
the 16th is fine.
Yeah, we want to make it as short as possible because we know you've been here for a while.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much
All right.
for all your insights. Appreciate it.
Okay. So, for our next. Sorry, our next application, you're seated again.
No, I'm going
Yes.
back.
Yeah, you're,
I seated for.
Yeski was seated for you,
Oh,
you're
I
going to be
guess I
seated.
have to, he's not here.
You're right. Our next application is Esther Chen, record owner for a final site plan and special permit at 40 West Elm. This application is also a must-close tonight, people, gentlemen. Mr. Fox will be seated on this application. Mr. Yeski had been seated for him previously. Mr. Fox has read in on the transcript and has taken his position. Hello, Junior.
Good evening, Madam Chair,
And then
members of the commission.
it's like-
John Hegney for the applicant. We left this
Junior.
open last time to get some more information about what the situation at the First Lutheran Church. We did our homework here and found that the First Lutheran Church was compliant with the zoning standards of 1956, back when it was constructed and built. The church currently features 210 seats, which would not give it available parking to give it to us under the current standards. However, we'd like to refer to the materials that we have previously submitted, indicating that we're looking to use the parking at times when the church services are not in session. In addition, we did look at the site. We think that there are sufficient parking spaces available. I think the neighborhood would merit it as well. A lot of the businesses in the area use the town hall parking, public parking as well. And we would ask that the commission consider approving this project with the 2 spaces at First Lutheran.
Okay, so First Lutheran, just to refresh everybody's memory, this is a medical practice. This is a residential use that is being converted to medical practice. In the medical practice, it would require 5 parking spaces. The building only has 1 per tenant.
Madam Chair, just one
Yeah,
note
I'm
about
just-
that.
Yeah,
Just,
I'm just refreshing the commission on the facts, so you don't have to debate me.
Well, I will say I would like to just quickly address the medical use. I think that the commission has a lot of leeway here to decide how they want to treat this, but
We
but there
can-
is,
We
even
can
though the.
waive the requirements, but we are not backing off on on it being a medical
I just want to
use.
clarify that the way that the state treats these types of licensures is very different the way that the town treats them. The state health department grants
Mr. Hegney, as I said to you
licenses to
yesterday.
medical professionals, non-medical professionals, asbestos removers, dentists. I just wanted to
agree.
say that the state doesn't make the same distinction that
Thank
the
you,
town
Mr.
does.
Hegney. The commission has made a determination and has interpreted its regulations as it is in full right to do, and that interpretation was made to you the last time we heard this, and we have not changed our minds since then. We are seeing this as a medical use. I think you should be grateful to us, because when people stick needles in you, it would be good to have it considered something medical. Now, we are able to waive the parking, which would actually be
6.25.
6.25. Your client has one parking space in the building and would have an agreement, you've shown us the agreement for the Lutheran Church, which, although legally non-conforming, has vacant spots during the week when it's not holding services. And so the commission, I believe, would be amenable to waiving the requirements of 6158. And we would ask you, we would condition you that there be one practitioner and no more than 2 patients at any time, and that there be no additional employees for this.
I think we actually defined it more as 3 occupants, no more than 3 occupants of the
At any
office.
time.
I did confirm that with my client before arriving this evening.
Okay, and that would mean you don't really need 6.25, because the 6.25 is to reflect employees. She's not gonna have employees on site.
And we
Okay.
did look at her business practice before coming in with this
All right,
proposal.
okay. With that, do you have any comments? Anybody?
So there's a change of use, they come back in.
There's a change of use. Well, if they went to a similar use, they wouldn't have to, because they've gone from residential to medical. So as long as they kept it medical,
With 3 occupants?
with 3 occupants, exactly.
They would be bound by this decision.
It
if
would
this
be
was a
bound by
vote.
this decision, but Mr. McRae can make, do I have any comments from the public? Okay, so if there's no comments from the commission, we will close this item.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I believe senior is. For our next application, we have Anthony and Michelle Pisacano.
I don't see it, Michelle.
Record owners for a final site plan and special permit to add 752 square feet to the existing single-family residence. You could,
Read is something we're going to go through, right?
right,
Let's get this done.
so
Let's do the setback.
I think we should do the setback, and then we'll get into the rest of it. So, Mr. Brower, you were at the briefing yesterday. You
I
know that
was.
word came out. To refresh everybody's memories, at the briefing yesterday, the calculation for this subdivision, this Chieftain subdivision, the old Gimbel Estate, when it was first done, the calculation requires a 60-foot separation between the buildings, and this proposal would reduce that separation to 58.7. And Mr. Brower, our take is that you would require a variance for that.
Okay, good evening. For the record, my name is Eric Brower on behalf of the applicant. And I did listen to the briefing session, but obviously all members were not there.
Yep.
It's a fairly complicated matter, so I'd like to,
Of course.
before, certainly address that issue, and actually to kind of speed things up, before I get into the presentation, you did receive today the letter from Chip Haslam on behalf of the association. It came in
Wait, no,
this afternoon.
no,
Okay.
not have.
All right, so,
So, no, could maybe,
all right.
maybe we could have it emailed to us now?
Let me check email.
I don't believe I received it via email. It said-
It's quite short. I'll read it to you. He transmitted it via an email to Katie, copied me, his client attorney on the association. Katie, please see attached letter relative to the association maintenance of the conservation area. The landscaper has already been advised not to, quote, square the mown area, but rather to observe the conservation easement contour and mow anything within that contour
Okay.
once annually only. We'll be
But
in
they'll need
touch.
to reseed it, because they've turned it into lawn, so they're also gonna need to restore it,
But-
just saying.
Well,
Madam Chair, don't we also have the issue of a structure or
Yeah, the 60-foot separation.
no, the putting green?
The putting green, we're
yes,
gonna get
I'll
to the putting green.
I'll get to all that. I just want to, this is
So
Chip's
there's
letter,
a,
if I
for
could finish
anybody
reading.
who, Mr. Levy, since you weren't at the briefing, I know you saw it in the staff report, but there's also a putting green that's been built in the open space.
Those are all part of the exhibits. If you bear with me, we'll go through it.
Yes,
Easier
we'll go-
just to.
Yep.
So if I could finish reading Chip's email, he said that he'll be in touch with Alexander Mock in any event to ensure ongoing compliance. Please also note that based on Jody Couture's confirmation of the existing and remaining FAR as conservatively calculated in the email below, the association's previously stated concerns in this regard, it's set forth in my letter to you of August 21, have been satisfactorily addressed. And then he attaches the letter itself to Katie dated October 1st. Dear Katie, as you know, I represent Chieftains Inc., the association which owns the common areas and manages the Chieftains development. I understand through Eric Brower, who represents Robin and Michael Pisicano in their application currently pending before the commission relative to the above referenced unit, that in the course of departmental review, the Conservation Commission staff noticed that a small portion of the conservation easement area at Chieftains has not been maintained in accordance with the easement language. Please be advised that the association regrets any deviation from the terms of the easement language, and representatives of the association would like to meet with Ms. Mock at her earliest convenience to identify and rectify any such non-compliance.
Okay.
So the association had met with our representatives, and they had no objection to the proposal. Their concern was really about the FAR, which we kept Mr. Haslam apprised of as we discussed that with Jody and the calculation. So Mr. Couture has found that acceptable. The association has found that
On
acceptable.
the FAR, we do not have a confirmation from him.
Yeah, I saw something.
You do, actually. It's,
Came okay.
Oh, it
Yep.
came in on, today?
Yeah.
Okay,
so it was short and sweet.
okay,
Okay.
got it. That's dated today or something?
Yeah,
'Cause
the
we didn't-
30th,
Okay,
Monday.
so on the
Yeah.
FAR, as of today, Jody's okay.
Yes.
Madam
Right.
Chair, if I could just make one
And on
statement.
the walls?
On the
is he-
record, about the FAR. I don't want anyone to take this and use it as the gospel of going forward about future developments. I mean, every project in this development will have to be evaluated as it accumulates, and so this is just a placeholder, for lack of a better word, regarding the.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because there could be further changes to the regulations that would either be
Correct.
more or less restrictive depending on who comes in when, and then ultimately at the 90% threshold, there actually has to be, at that point at least, certified architectural calculations of everything. So it's, Pat's correct, it's not a once and for all
As
sign-off.
we know in zoning, 1 + 1 can equal 4 or anything.
Well, we're in the 58,000 square foot range versus 752, so. Anyhow, so it's documented, that's been accepted, the association no longer has any concern or objection. You also have the Historic District Commission has indicated their approval of the project. Health Department has approved the 100% septic replacement area, and the Wetlands Agency has issued a green sheet for the project. So that leaves us with the two issues, the mowing resolution, and then, as the chair pointed out, the business of the separation. So if I could just walk you through it.
Oh, did you mention the putting green?
Yes. No, I didn't. Well, I did earlier, but I will again.
That's still an
It's-
open, yeah,
We'll do that one first. It's gone.
okay.
It will be gone. I was hoping to argue that it was green in some respect,
No, I mean, we debated that,
but it's actually artificial turf when I saw it today, so I'm coming up short on,
But, you know, truthfully, And this is where we think the open space regulations need to be clearer?
about what's green.
Yeah, they need to be, oh, maybe we should let the Conservation Commission work on that.
Exactly. Active versus passive.
Active versus passive, and to what extent you can have man-made, and where do we define recreational, playgrounds, for example, et cetera. We'll send that to the Conservation Commission.
I think it's a good idea. All right, so we're done with that one. So just to refresh everybody, this is a project that was approved 30 years ago, long before almost all of us. And the cover sheet gives you a GIS aerial photo of the layout. It's on King Street, the corner of Sherwood. Right, King Street at that point is the New York State border. You can see to the west, there's a slightly different zoning applicable to that area. Fortunately, this side is a very green area. And I put a little indent map here, index map, to show you the full extent of the property, which goes off of the GIS page. So what you see in that little white map is the entire 97.6 acre tract, and the green is what has been dedicated permanently as open space. The larger area to the east was conveyed to the Audubon, subject to all the restrictions, and the association maintains the upper areas, including this conservation easement area that had the mowing issue. So that was a homeowners association issue, and they'll work on that. It may be as simple as simply not mowing except once a year. The restriction states it's annual. If Alex feels it needs to be overseeded.
Well, we'll ask her to comment.
Yeah, so we'll definitely meet with them on that. So the next page is some shots of the project itself, gates, entry off of Sherwood Avenue is the only entrance. The alley that was planted at the time back in '88. The old maples that lined it were in decline, and they were replaced. And then we have a view of the unit across from the loop drive, and then the bottom picture is a shot of the house itself at the front. The addition that's being proposed is on the back side of the garage, which is not visible from any of the streets or driveways. The next sheet, page 3, has a couple more photos of the front of the unit as you come down the main drive. The photo at the bottom is significant in that it's a picture from the loop road with the subject unit on the left and our neighbor on the right. And the addition is going on the back of or east of the garage, and there's significant separation provided by screening, including a lot of evergreen screening between the two units, which you'll see in some of the other photographs. Sheet 4 is a copy of the actual recorded approved site plan, which shows you the deeded open space areas as well as that conservation easement area that runs behind or east of units 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can see we're unit 3 there. Sheet 5 is, again, some more photos of the existing condition. The upper right is the garage. The back of the garage in the shadow is where the proposed addition will take place. That's essentially in line with the existing south face of the building. Sheet 6 is a copy of the landscape plan that was also reviewed and approved by the Historic District Commission. You can see the striped area where the addition is proposed. The putting green where it says putt is the area that will be restored and have that area removed. And the conservation easement area line, you can see there's no encroachments into it, existing or proposed. The septic system is actually located in there, and there are several units on that eastern slope that have septic system within that easement area, and that was a specific exception that the easement allowed for those structures only to be placed in the conservation easement area. Sheet 7 is the actual site plan, survey, topo of all existing conditions in the proposed orange addition. Sheet 8 are some Google aerial views, and the purpose of these are to show you the proximity and the relationship of units 2 and 3, the significant evergreen screening that exists between the two. So the proposed addition in no way is visible to unit 2 or to actually any other unit or street view.
It shows how much lawn is cut.
What's that?
Shows how much lawn is cut, too.
Yes, so it's a weird, Alex suggested that there be monuments. They're there, but they're probably the marble monuments, which are grown over and without a metal detector that detects marble, you're not going to find them. So it's kind of evident somewhere along here at the dark tree line is the land that the Audubon owns. Then there's a meadow area. Then there's this mowed easement area. So there needs to be a better delineation, I think, of those different areas so that everybody knows what they're doing. Okay, so then, sheet 9 shows you the first floor plan proposed. You can see the orange line is the extent of the existing dwelling, and the addition that's being filled in essentially using the line of the garage to be a continuation to the east for the expanded family room, eat-in, kitchen area. The bottom portion is the actual survey that shows you how, for the most part, the two buildings are separated by more than 60 feet, but because of the way they exist non-parallel to each other and there's convergence, by the time you get to the back of Unit 2, we do dip below the 60 by 1.33 feet. So I understand it was discussed at the briefing session, but I wasn't obviously able to speak at that point. So what I've attached is a copy of the regulation in 6-30, as well as a letter, which is an official request to the commission via the chair, that pursuant to the special permit authority of the regulation, that the commission allow a lesser distance between the buildings. So it references the number of feet that we're talking about, the photographs that we looked at, and demonstrating the de minimis nature of the 1.33 feet of unnoticeable encroachment. The purposes that need to be met if you were to grant such an allowance would be first that the special permit standards be met, and that they be consistent with the purposes of the original purpose of the conservation zone. So as to the special permit conditions, I think that you would have to agree that the 1.33 is clearly de minimis. It's not perceptible. There's been no objection from the association or the neighbor. The Historic District Commission approved of the design not only for its authority under the historic structures compatibility, but also with adjacent units and their setting. So by putting the addition to this house essentially on the side, building to building, it keeps the rear side, which is really where all the significant open space is taking place, unencroached upon. So in that respect, we think it's consistent. So I know there was a discussion, or somebody pointed out, is it possible that 6-128 might be applicable to resolve the encroachment? That section allows for chimneys, bays, or other structural projections that don't exceed 10 feet to project 2 feet within a required yard setback. As was discussed, and I think is correct, that's not the same exact language that we have when it discusses the separation between principal buildings. There was discussion about, even though this may not be harmful to the project or to the community, where does the commission draw the line? If it were to grant this, what's the next person going to do? So what I was suggesting is that we make a minor reduction in the width of the bay, which is now some 2 by 11 feet, to be 2 by 10, and
Great.
therefore be consistent with what the intent of 6-128 is, and be kind of a benchmark that the commission could use in determining.
So
in
are
this
you gonna
case,
go
we-
to 60 feet, or are you leaving it 3/10?
No,
Sure.
I'm sorry, so the projection, go to the,
So you're gonna,
so right now, it projects 2 feet by 11 plus. So we're saying that we can definitely make it 2 by 10, so that at least is consistent with the spirit of 6-128.
I'm
So-
sorry, how is that consistent?
With the spirit, well, it tells you that, as with the separation distance, which starts out as a regulation, says buildings must be X number of feet from the property line. And then it says, however, in the following circumstances, you get a built-in exception for these kinds of projections. That being done on the basis that, so long as they're not within 5 feet of a yard, that they are customary and don't represent the bulk or the impact of that actual house. So whether it's a chimney, a projecting portico, or a bay, is something that, for the sake of 2 feet, is an allowance. So I chose the 2 by 10 to, rather than arbitrarily say this could be 4 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, something that at least made sense, to have it be similar is a bay, has some rationale in terms of where to draw the line, and it's something that clearly your regulations permit you to do. The declaration of restrictions, which I'll hand in, I don't know if, I know Alexander submitted a part about the easement areas, but I'll submit for the record the full declaration of restrictions that includes the historic overlays, all the other maintenance responsibilities, the effect of the historic overlay zone, et cetera.
Mr. Brower, before you hand that out, the 60 feet is part of the subdivision declaration?
That's an important
It's a-
distinction. This is not a
It is
subdivision.
not a subdivision,
Okay,
it's a
well,
conservation zone.
It's a site
The
plan.
okay.
It was approved
Is the
as a site
60-foot
plan,
separation part of?
a
site
zoning
plan?
regulation.
No,
It's the
no,
regulations as they pertain to this.
to this
because there's-
particular development.
Because
No,
it's not a
it-
subdivision.
Any conservation cluster zone, which is allowable in the 2 and 4 acre zones, these would be applicable.
So
Okay, so the
you
60
multiply, remember that was the math that Patrick was doing yesterday
Yeah.
at the briefing? Okay.
Okay, so the 60 feet is
In the
our
regs.
conservation cluster zone. The separation required by
It's
our.
one of many regulations within that zone, and there's also, as I put into the attachment, the regulation, there are several sections where, for consideration, the commission can in fact allow changes to those.
G4.
Yeah, so
Okay,
it
lesser
relates
distance
to.
between principal buildings.
So under G, there's, under a special permit, you can waive setbacks from property lines, greater number of attached housing, division of building into separate dwelling units, as well as a lesser distance. So it's a very lengthy regulation with standards, which then
So this, just
built in.
where I'm going with this is that the 60 feet is our regulation.
Yes.
And
G says we have a little wiggle room with that.
it does.
You're referencing 6-128. I think it's D.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're gonna keep it no more than 10 feet out of the building line, or, excuse me, 2 feet out of the building line, 10 feet wide.
Yes.
Okay, so you're covered basically twice, one by G4, lesser distance between principal buildings, and 6-128.
Well, if you agree, it applies.
Okay, now,
If it
just to get back
applies.
to,
and we-
getting back to where we were talking, what's the projection now?
2,
It's 2 now?
2 feet.
Okay, so we're gaining anything, it's just getting smaller in terms of length, from 11 feet down to 10 feet.
Yes, and 2 is, the 1.33 is at the closest point. If you look
Towards
at
the
the little.
street. Yeah, I see
If you
it.
look at that little diagram on 9, it goes to almost no encroachment at the eastern end.
Okay. Great. Okay, because it would seem to actually now, understanding, I think I was a little confused as to the 60 feet, if that was part of the development or our regulation. If it's part of our regulation, we do have then wiggle room to
Exactly.
adjust this
So
accordingly.
it's listed
I think
in
the fact that
section.
you're actually tying it back to 6128, which is even, it's another kind of belt and suspenders on it.
Right, it's a basis, and I agree, the comment was made by one of the commission members, is that, you know, well, where do we go with this? You know, how far? 2, 4, 5, 10 feet, 20 feet? So 128 is, I think, a very rational basis for your consideration.
I think it actually, that way, it kind of covers everything in terms of that.
Okay. So,
I would still say that we are still left with an issue, which is that we agree to this, and the next person who comes in says, well, you did this, and why not let me do a little bit more? That our conservation zone regulations specify something, and it's worked for 20 years?
30, and if I might
30.
point out, a lot of,
Oh, for a long
30,
time.
what you see is, and Tim Peck,
And-
our architect who's here, will tell you that a lot of the houses built 30 years ago are missing certain components.
We're only asking for 1.3 feet on a 752 square foot addition. We're just asking that it be brought into the regulations. That's all. It doesn't seem unreasonable.
can I get a little clarification?
Absolutely.
Is this,
Could you
Is
turn on
this-
your microphone?
it is, is this encroachment something that has a footing?
Yes, it's part of the
Okay. What if it
foundation.
were a cantilever?
Well, that's what but see,
But-
you're doing the spirit of the
But I
reg.
just want to know, how does that change it? I don't understand.
Well, 6128 actually specifically says it doesn't care if it was
Okay,
cantilever
so-
connected
okay,
to the
so
ground.
there is no.
There's no change, yes.
There's no change.
Mr. Levy, the regulations don't.
Turn your mic on.
The regulations regarding this particular zone specify to structure and not towards setbacks or acceptable, there's not the same definition doesn't exist for bay windows or eaves or things like that in the regulations for this zone as it does for every other building in
Do you have any
town.
comments?
Right,
Okay.
and I
So-
acknowledge that. I'm saying
Okay.
6128 provides a rational basis for the request if we can provide with what it
But-
regulates as permissible exceptions.
I understand that's directionally it's facing south. But you can still have a bay window without having it jut out for 2 feet
No,
plus.
but the problem is it's part of a structure. That was what Pat was just saying.
So I'm saying that, if you're, well,
Tim, do you want to,
are you looking, so,
Let's let
are you
Tim
going to try to
get,
get
I just
And
want the addition to
are
be
you
smaller.
trying to get,
It's a foot. Okay, they knew this restriction. These people
are you
grew
trying to
up,
go to,
they grew up in this
Actually,
house.
Madam Chair, if I may, when we first started this, Tim Peck for the applicant,
Hello, Tim Peck.
we were working, the original surveys we were working with didn't have the fully dimensions between, and it was and the assumption was that the house was actually parallel to the property, the line demising.
And it turned out that the
It
other.
turns out that they weren't, so
Right.
that's where the discrepancy ended up.
We got that.
But I have a feeling that if this was a fireplace or a chimney, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I don't.
I would.
I would be surprised if it
Well, I
were.
would still be having it because my problem is not with this application. My problem is with opening the door. Okay, that's it. That,
Are we opening the door, or are we?
yes,
I think
you
the reg-
allow a modification, I'm just saying, slippery slope. he's given you a way out for this one. The next creative applicant comes in with another way out and says, you did this for so-and-so, for Brower's guy, therefore, here's a way you can still meet the intent of the regulations. And you've opened something. This has worked for a long time. This is a big house. You can just reduce it by a foot. There was a problem with the survey. The ZBA gets this kind of thing all the time.
except
The
that this-
building, the building department doesn't just say, oh yeah, that's okay. They go to ZBA. When the survey was inaccurate and they build over where they were supposed to go, you and I both know, they go to ZBA and they get a variance.
So this
We
is,
don't just play Mr. Nice Guy.
But there's no, but they
It's
get
the
a
intent.
variance if there's a reason for it.
There's a reason for it
Your
here. They are not
regulation-
meeting the regulation, and we chose not to waive our regulation. We chose not to modify the conditions. Your call. That's just how I
That's just an
feel.
inconvenience, that's not a,
I think the
This
call
is
is
not-
actually.
It's not an inconvenience if you're making, what's an
no,
inconvenience?
no, I mean, for ZBA to say it's okay,
ZBA has to find a hardship.
it has to find it, this is not an inconvenience, not hardship, there's no hardship here.
and there doesn't need to
Exactly.
be. Your regulation is specific. It sets forth the general please. And it says right point blank, you may allow a lesser distance, no Board of
I got it.
Appeals.
I don't
So-
want to do that may because I think it opens a door. It's been our position on other things where we have a may and we have the flexibility. There are times when we say no because it opens the door. It's how I feel. It may not be how the rest of the commission feels. See how it goes. I feel very strongly
Well,
about
it's-
this.
Clearly, the regulation allows you to do it, it meets special permit standards, there's no objection, and I think using the 6128 as a benchmark is a sound, defensible position for you or anybody who comes in and tries to argue something different. We're not
Okay.
proposing regulation change, we don't need a variance, we're asking for you to use the powers that you
What is
have
it?
to make a finding that,
I just find it strange.
Turn your microphone on.
I do. Actually, this.
We'll tell
night.
them to be loud. Be loud.
With this 60-foot dimension, this lot, these two houses were put that close together with no wiggle room. Where they had wiggle room on the other side of the lot. It's just strange in this type of development in this size of conservation zone that they give themselves no wiggle room.
well, it's
And
at
I-
60-foot plus was the as-built condition.
It
So-
was
It's been added to before.
barely 60. Okay? My point is, when you develop, you don't go zero tolerance for expansion purposes. And I think we're,
Well, they're adding, I mean, they're adding 10 feet. I mean, they had 60 foot, as he's saying, they had close to 70 feet to start.
No, it was
well,
always
not
just,
where the
60.
existing-
just 60 plus.
Six, oh, that's right, because you're closing off the angle, right?
Right.
You're closing
Yep.
off that corner,
And
sorry.
so I think that where
I think maybe-
Margarita's coming up and is, in this case, put the bay window towards the rear. Do something where we're not impacting it. And, you know, I just,
push this back.
I don't understand, you know, why you're asking for it. So,
Well, I don't think there's an impact, and you do clearly have the authority to do it. And Tim, do you want to explain any more to the architecture, or?
No, I think, we've been through this twice with the Historic Commission. They were happy to see the articulation on the side. But again, that's prior to coming to the commission. I think if we pull it back a foot and a half, you're only going to be projecting 6 or 8 inches off the face of the building, which, we don't have windows on the side of the bay. It's primarily a focal point on the end of the kitchen inside. But I just don't know if it'll have the impact on the, on the elevation that it would be with a true bay to have that projection.
I
Patrick, do you have any
hate
comment?
to be negative, but this is a projection articulation that no one sees. I mean, this is, right, this is a planted buffer between the two buildings. So in one regard, although I appreciate the HGC's comment, it's a detail that no one knows about.
Right, but it's
or would
actually,
see.
on the inside, it's part of the breakfast area and the
Right,
kitchen.
the
So
owners
it
know
gives,
that.
the owners, it's part of the design feature in the house.
So it obviously relates to something interior.
Correct.
So that's the significance of it. Is there a way to just push the whole addition back that 0.3 foot, so that the articulation stays, but it doesn't start even with the wall, which I'm assuming is the garage at what I'm looking at is the left
No,
end?
because the way that house in particular was designed, the roof lines are extremely tough to work with. So
Understood.
that's
Okay.
why we
Rick
kept everything
Moisen,
in
the
line.
architect?
Yes. It's a French chateau style, and it was very difficult getting the.
We've experienced that recently, French style.
Okay.
He did that all the buildings.
I don't think we have any comments from the public. Mr. Hardman, Mr. Levy, do you want to add anything to this? Any thoughts?
No, I think it's a reasonable request.
All right, Mr. Levy?
I appreciate that there are difficulties with working with a particular style. It just seems like that there's more to work with here, with the interior architecture to give them a nice space. I just don't, it may be true that the roof line is very difficult, but if you took off that bay, I don't see what that would do to the roof line. And it seems to me that there's plenty to work with. You have a large space here, and it could be reconfigured.
Okay. Okay, so Mr. Fox doesn't want to add anything. Mr. McRae, any thoughts that you want to add?
I think under the conservation zone, because this is a site plan special permit, that 6-30 section, G4 really does apply.
Okay.
It does give us some wiggle room to look at things. I think the fact that actually the applicants actually agreed to conform to the 6-128 and keep it at 2 feet by 10 feet is kind of the belt and suspenders. I also think that actually the de minimis encroachment of 1.33 feet in comparison to 60 feet of separation and the significant size of the homes that are up there, an expert wouldn't be able to see this.
But nothing is ever de minimis because you are setting a precedent. And when you
Okay,
set
and I
a
think
precedent, and that's my issue,
Yes.
you are setting a precedent, and
And the precedent's
we've-
being covered by,
it can be
we
changed
have,
in the future.
we have the wiggle room because of the site plan special permit. The applicant is conforming to a separate section of our regulations. And that, because on case-by-case basis, if
Okay.
somebody came in and said, I want to go over
All
10
right.
feet, we'd have a real problem. If I want to go over by a few inches, that's a different story.
Okay, so.
For precedent, just one last comment.
Yeah.
This, for precedent setting, is the greenest, most historically preserved project that's ever come before the town.
Mr. Brower, that's not the point.
Well, it
The
is,
point
because it's within the context of
No.
what was, well, it
It's
actually
not
says that in the
point.
regulations.
It's a wonderful thing, but I have seen too many times where somebody comes in and asks for a tiny accommodation that down the road turns into a very big one because we open the door. And they give us wording to get around it, and The next guy gives us wording to get around it. And I'm sorry, I've just gotten to be hard line on that specific topic. I used to be more flexible till I paid for it. And I started seeing things I didn't like because we said yes the first time. And that's just where I come out. But there's 5 of us sitting here, and we'll see how it goes. So are you guys in agreement to close this? I said we just opened it, we can leave it open, but I don't think there's anything Mr. Brower would add in the future or that we're asking him to do.
No, I think we can close it.
Okay,
I think,
so
we
we will close this?
Yes, and we would anticipate the resolving the planting and the mowing, something that would be,
Or
could be a condition of
whatever
approval.
happens, you're gonna be told about that.
Oh, yeah, no, in the regulation, the declaration
Yeah.
says that it's enforceable. It's the association's obligation to comply. If they don't, you get to charge them, fine them, and lien their property. So there's a process for that.
All right, okay.
One more thing.
Done.
Did you get the letter from Mr. Haslam?
No.
Can you send that down this way?
Okay, before we go into decision mode, I just wanted to add one more comment. If this was a side setback on a building that was not a conservation zone, there would be no wiggle room, and they would have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. So in a very valuable conservation area, we're using our discretion to apply our standards in what I think is a looser way, and that's what I disagree with. I've been to the Board of Appeals where the same kind of error has happened in a survey. The survey was misleading, and something got built, and the debate was what should happen. So with that, I think we can close the public hearing.
With the clarification, if I could, that
Though, is, this is a setback and not. Can you turn the microphone on?
Right, correct.
It's not an encroachment into the conservation area.
correct.
And so,
Yes, you're right.
I think, I totally agree, even though we might have wiggle room to go into a conservation area, this isn't it. So I don't see them the same way.
No, I don't, that's not following that. One, if this was a side yard and we make it 2 by 10, there would be no variance required. It would be by right. So it's the quirk of the separation distance. So,
I mean, if you had a 50-foot side yard and you decided to go 48.7 feet in the RA4, you would have to go,
no, if we proposed the 2 by 10, which we're now saying we want is 2 by 10, you would not need a variance. It would be permitted by 6128.
not in a normal
Yes.
RA4.
Absolutely.
No.
Yes, you can have a chimney.
Oh, because you're
bay.
doing a bay window.
Yes.
Yes, got you.
So that's the comparison, and we're beating a dead horse, but I just think that
done.
your regulation allows for it. You have the authority to stop the next guy, and I don't, if you've got a good project. and you-
Okay, we got it.
You got it?
Yep, we got it.
All right.
No food?
Thank
Okay.
you.
What?
No food?
No food. I forgot, the nuts are in here and I forgot. Okay, we so endeth the public meeting. And that's it. So we have one item to decide?
Two.
Two? Yes, two.
Chen and.
Chen
Scott.
and this one, yeah. I know. Oh, you wrote two already? Okay, that's enough carbs. They're a slippery slope, just like this. Just
Who's starting this show?
Okay, so, how do you want to do this with resolutions and,
Just go backwards.
you want to go backwards? So you guys know where I come out. I think you guys are okay with this. Did you want to have any discussion? You pretty much know where I stand.
Let me make the motion first.
Are you
Okay.
sure?
No, I mean, do you want to have a
Do you want
discussion?
to clarify your position?
Well, you know, I don't like being fuzzy.
How about prickly?
Oh, okay. So I'm going to make a motion.
That was so much fun.
Can we go with the motion?
Yes, go ahead.
In the matter of site plan special permit PLPZ 2019-00387 for an addition of approximately 752 square feet to a property located at 77 Sherwood Avenue, number 3, in the RACC-4-HO zone. Motion to approve said plan, site plan and special permit, noting the following conditions, that the zoning, whereas the zoning enforcement officer has reviewed the FAR and has endorsed that. Hold on, wait.
Yeah, but do all the detail.
And that
Doesn't mean I'm giving up.
the FAR is, for the complete site, I'm gonna get this right, Patrick, is, subject to verification. How would we,
I think they provided enough evidence that they're not within 10% of the maximum.
right,
And that future development may or may need to confirm their compliance as.
Each
Okay.
additional further
Yep.
development would be, has to be reviewed to see if it meets that 10%
Okay.
threshold.
You know, I brought the nuts.
okay. The applicant has demonstrated that the conservation zone provides special permit under 6-30G4, that the commission has the opportunity to waive, I've lost it.
The 60-foot
There it is.
separation that would be otherwise
Notwithstanding the
required
provisions
under
of 6-30A, B, and C, that a lesser distance between principal buildings is acceptable. They also confirm that actually the addition, or the encroaching addition, will be kept to a maximum of 2 feet in depth off the building line and 10 feet wide, with a de minimis encroachment of 1.33 feet. The applicant understands there has been encroachment into the conservation areas and has agreed to remove the putting green and will restore the open space as required in the Declaration of Restrictions. Mr. Haslin, Chip Haslin of Justin Haslin Hoagman, in his letter to the Director of October 1st, 2019, acknowledges that the association would meet with Conservation to talk about and establish a plan for such restoration. Let's see.
You got rid of the putting green, right?
Yes, got rid of the putting green.
And you said meadow or whatever conservation says.
Yes, they're going to meet with representative of Conservation to discuss the restoration plan. And it's proper maintenance, whether it's mowed once a year, et cetera, et cetera. Anything else to add?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I nominate.
Nay.
Oh, Levy's a nay. Fails to carry.
So do we want to rephrase the motion?
Okay,
Yeah. that's a good
go
idea.
ahead. So rephrase the motion, and I think you're gonna have to do all the conservation stuff still. And you're-
Rephrase.
Well, you've got to move to deny.
Okay.
I don't think that's going to carry either.
Well, is the sticky point the distance between the buildings?
Right.
And then do we?
So it's not going to change, it's just going to fail to carry. I mean, if you move to deny, you're going to still get a split vote. You're going to get 2 in favor and 3 against.
Well, it's denied now, so it'd be
Yeah.
a separate motion with the conditions reorganized in a way that perhaps would get harder for.
Now, it would either be the same conditions or a modification of the
Not gonna
commission,
happen.
condition. That the only modification would be actually moving the addition back.
Or shooting me and Levy for being tough.
Don't go there.
I mean, to state the obvious, if you deny the they have to comply. So are you, if you're not objecting to the addition, just the incremental
Yes.
imposition into the 60-foot, then approve it with the 60-foot being required and then go from there. A motion to make that. If that's the only motion, only condition of the motion that is objectionable to the majority of the commission, then we can go from there.
Good
If
idea.
we want to go point by point, we can do that, but I'm assuming that's the only.
Okay.
Good idea.
All right.
Good idea.
So
Second, then.
Okay.
everything I said except for the.
Everything I said except, let's remove the let's remove the,
Just they say that the.
Continue
to
addition
abide
must comply
with-
with the 60.
With the regulations contained in, with the
This-
separation
okay,
distances would
applicant
be.
should,
Right.
applicant should maintain the 60-foot separation between buildings as required by the section 630. And try to, or move the structure or revise the structure as such to maintain the 60-foot setback and decrease the encroachment of the 1.33 feet.
I don't know. I
Does
had
that
them
work
with
better?
me and I can't find them, yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, same comments before, conservation. Remove the
Actually,
putting
hold on
green.
a second. Yeah, remove the putting, everything the same, except that it shall comply with the 60-foot separation as originally. Do I have a second?
Aye, sir.
Fox seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. No? Okay, so now we get to do the acupuncturist.
Okay, get my stuff together here. This was a little bit more weird.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, for the item PLPZ 2019 262 and 2019 035, convert a residential unit 1C to an acupuncturist office on a property located at 40 West Elm Street in the CGB and CGIO zones. Motion to approve application, noting the following. The office shall be only occupied at all times by 3 people, maximum of 3 occupants in the room, in the building, in the space. An agreement from the First Lutheran Church, or is it second?
I think it's first.
Lutheran Church,
Lutheran Church.
Lutheran Church on Field Point Road.
right, has provided an agreement that the office, this applicant can use 2 of their spaces during non-church uses, non-church times. That the whereas the commission can waive section 6158 for the requirement of 6.25 spaces. I believe that's the maximum that we're. It's noted that actually the applicant has the use of 1 space allotted to the space inside the building, and that would be used for the employee at the site, the doctor.
Not necessarily. She could let a patient have it, and she could park at the Lutheran Church.
Whatever.
That's 3 patients or,
3 occupants of the space,
and then 1 practitioner.
No.
No.
Total.
3 occupants in total.
I just want.
But it's actually her and 1 patient waiting and 1 patient being treated, because on this basis, there should be no employees
So it's 2 patients
and her.
3 occupants, patients, whatever, it doesn't
No,
matter.
no,
just
you do,
only 3
because
people.
employees changes your parking ratio.
or the medical.
Doctor is included in that, yes.
Just get that done. Okay. Wasn't that fun?
Second.
Hold on a second. There was one thing. The commission has to, did we note that the Lutheran Church is legally non-conforming parking?
Yes, we just did.
He did.
And that there's an agreement?
My understanding in this motion is that this is just going to be information for future, not.
Exactly.
They're not going to be bound to keep this agreement.
Oh, I forgot to say that. And any change, any modification of the conditions included in this motion, in this decision, will have to be
Must return
submitted.
to the
Must
commission.
return to the commission. And did we vote yet? Okay.
Just seconded.
Fox seconded it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Time to
Patrick,
go.
do we
Motion to adjourn.
have minutes?
Minutes. Yes, we do.
I wasn't here, so I can't do them.
Could you just check, Nick, I think.
There's 2 sets of minutes.
There is 2 cents? Okay.
Yeah, the agenda has it. I'll tell you which
I
they
didn't
are.
see them
Oh, no, but,
attached.
Oh, well, Nick says he signed them at the last
We only
meeting.
have 4 to approve, so we need everybody.
Because I wasn't here.
Well, he can,
One.
you saw them now.
Okay, so this is the.
You saw?
How can I approve minutes if I wasn't
But
here?
you read all the transcripts. Okay.
Okay.
No, we're gonna do them the next time.
September 4th then.
To September
I
4th?
wasn't here.
Have a
We can
arugula.
vote without you.
If you're not gonna vote on it.
Yeah, we can vote on it.
We
Okay.
can vote with just 4.
Could I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I
You're not
Yeah,
gonna vote
move
on
that
it.
we approve the
minutes of September 4th. Do I have a second? Levy seconds.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. We're good. Okay. So Happy New Year again, and thank you for the cookies. So what do you want to?